Pardon? Yep. The agenda itself, minutes, item number 1, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of November 2018, been on the table for half an hour before the meeting. Is your wish, I sign it as a true record. Thank you. Apologies for absence. Emma.
We have apologies from councillors Mike Band, Maurice Byam, Carol Coburn and John Ward, and Councillor John, he hasn't, all right, oh, Councillor Byam has arrived, sorry about that. I think Councillor Fraser is going to arrive, but possibly later for the second item. Fine.
Item number 3, declarations of interest. Emma, what do we have?
None received before the meeting.
Question from members of the public, Emma.
Chairman.
Up.
Forgive me.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Foresky.
Thank you, Chairman, and my apologies for not notifying you sooner. But I would like to declare under item 3 a non-pecuniary interest in items relating to page 30, where reference is made to the Little Meadow application under 2015-0478 and 2017-0738, and that's a non-pecuniary interest because it's in the application.
Noted. Item number 5, Emma. Questions from members Have we had any?
No.
Thank you. And Beth, performance against government targets.
Thank you, Chairman. Members will see on page 5 the performance set out of the planning service against government targets on speed and quality, and you'll note that we continue to perform well against these targets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on then to item B1, WA 2017-2391, land south of the High Street between Alfold Road and Knoll Lane, Cranley, GU6 8NE, pages 7 to 54. Rebecca Clark, please introduce this.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could firstly take members through some updates for the report. So firstly, there is a written update sheet. This sets out that some amended planting plans have been submitted. These have all been reviewed by officers and are considered to be acceptable. It also sets out that we've received confirmation from the County Council's Principal Environmental Assessment Officer that sufficient information has been submitted with regards to the requirements of the EIA regulations. There's also further information in terms of the requirement set out in the Section 106 agreement in respect of the submission of a play space specification and a play space management plan. These details have been reviewed by our Parks, Project and Play Space Officer and are considered to be acceptable. There's also a number of amendments to the conditions, and those are all set out on the written update sheet. In addition, I've got a verbal update to provide. This hopefully will provide a little bit more clarity in terms of the affordable housing section in the agenda report. So members will see on page 11 of the agenda report, there is a plan and a table set out on that page. That plan and table confirms the amount of affordable housing for each phase of the whole scheme, which is specified in the Section 106 agreement. For phase 2, the Section 106 agreement states that 50 affordable units would be provided. However, the applicant now intends to provide 58 affordable units within phase 2, so that represents an increase of 8. Just to clarify, however, that increase is not to the overall number of affordable units to be provided as part of the whole scheme, but rather it reflects an earlier delivery of more affordable housing than originally proposed. So the site as a whole would continue to deliver the 30% affordable units as secured under the Section 106 agreement. So just to break that down, so there would be 58 units under phase 2, 48 would be provided under the current phase 2.2, and 10 would be provided under phase 2.1, and that's subject of a current application which is under assessment. Phase 3 would then deliver 63 affordable units, and phase 4, 7. So in total there would be 128 as per the 106 agreement. So for the current phase 2.2, which is before members this evening, there would be 48 units, and that equates to 37% affordable. Also, just to update members, there's a recommended condition 7, that's on page 46 of the agenda report. Officers propose just to replace the word implemented with completed. There's also an additional recommended condition, and this would secure full details of the bridge specification for the crossing over Nuthurst Stream, which connects the southern and northern areas of the site before you. So that's all the updates to provide. I'll now get on to the committee presentation. So the location plan can be seen on screen. The application before members this evening relates to the area outlined in red, which is phase 2.2. The land outlined in blue forms the wider site, which was subject to the outline permission. So to put this in some context with the surroundings, we've got Cranley High Street to the north, we've got Knoll Lane to the east, and Alfold Road to the west. So this just shows some photographs of the site. The site essentially comprises an open field. So the proposed development falls within what is phase 2 of the wider development. Phase 2 has been split up into phases 2.1 and 2.2, but this then shows members the other phases. Phase 1 is currently under construction at the moment, and phases 3 and 4 will be subject to future reserve matters applications. So this was the illustrative master plan, which was submitted at the outline planning stage. Outline planning permission was granted on appeal in March 2016 for the erection of up to 425 dwellings, and access was determined at the outline stage. So the principle of 425 dwellings across the whole site has already been established, as has the access. So turning to the current proposal. So the current application seeks approval for the layout, appearance, scale and landscaping for phase 2.2, which is the area outlined in red. As I've just mentioned, access was determined at the outline stage, and I'll just provide an overview of each of the elements. So firstly, with regards to the layout, the plan shows 130 dwellings which are spread across the site. The road network and watercourse essentially splits the site up into a northern section and a southern section. There are areas of open space in the south, and then there are 3 areas of play space. So we've got one in the north in the courtyard, we've got one on the very east, and then we've got a larger one to the south. In terms of scale, the dwellings would primarily be 2-storey, 2.5-storey, with dormers set into the roof. There would be some single-storey elements such as garages, porches and rear projections. The flatted buildings, which are located in the north, so we've got 4 buildings, 1 to the very north and then 3 in the middle. Those would be 3 stories in height. In terms of appearance, I'll take you through some elevational slides in due course, but the dwellings would be of a traditional design. There would be a variety of different roof forms, footprints and materials. In terms of landscaping, there would be a mixture of hard surfacing materials within the site. The amenity areas would be marked with 1.8 metre high close boarded fencing, and there would be areas of 1.2 metres high post and rail fencing, and then there would be soft landscaping throughout the site. So turning to affordable housing, so the scheme provides a mixture of market and affordable housing. The affordable units are set in colour on the plan. As I've just mentioned, 58 would be provided as part of the overall phase 2, 48 would be provided as part of the current phase. In terms of parking, there would be 267 allocated spaces. Then there would be an additional 29 visitor spaces, and the overall provision would exceed the council's parking guidelines. There has been a condition recommended to secure the use of the garages for the parking of vehicles and incidental storage. That's condition 5 in the agenda report. There would be some communal cycle stores provided to serve the flatted units to the north, and then the dwellings would have space within private amenity spaces or the garages for cycle storage. So as previously mentioned, there would be a mixture of 2, 2.5 and 3-storey built form. So the dark blue colour on the plan, that shows up to 3 storeys. The dwellings, which are in dark blue, would be 2.5, with the dormers in the roof to provide habitable accommodation. And then the 4 buildings in the northern section would be 3 storeys. The remaining would be 2 storeys. In terms of refuse, so we have had swept path analysis submitted. That's been reviewed, and it demonstrates that the site can accommodate a refuse vehicle. Areas for the storage of bins would take place in amenity areas or communal bin stores. And then there are bin collection points, and they've been designed in a way that the collection would be curbside. So if you could just make out, apologies that it is quite small, but the collection points would be the blue points on the curbs, and then the red would be within the amenity spaces for storage. So the next 2 slides will show some intended material palettes. This first slide shows the proposed external materials for the dwellings. So as members will see, there's a mixture of brickwork, tile hanging, render and timber boarding, and then there would be a mixture of roof tiles as well. And this then shows the intended materials for the hard surfaced areas within the site. So there would be a mixture of tarmac and different colour paving. So the next few slides will show members the proposed dwelling designs. So this first slide shows some examples of detached buildings. We then go on to some examples of the semi-detached buildings. And this is some of the terrace buildings within the site. And then lastly, this would be some examples of the flatted buildings to the north of the site. So there would be some detached garages. The examples are shown in the top photo. And there would be a substation located in the southeastern corner of the site, and the building is shown there on the bottom. So the next 2 slides are going to provide some 3D visuals of the sites. So the first one shows the flatted buildings, which would be provided to the very north of the site. And then the bottom one are the 2 flatted buildings, which would be set either side of the road leading into that northern area. And then the top visual there is the 4th flatted building in the northern section, so that's sited on the western side. And then the bottom then, those are the houses which would be in the southern section of the site, immediately viewable as you come into the site. So the matters of principal and technical opinion and the matters of judgment are set out on the slide. Overall, officers consider that the reserved matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping for phase 2.2 would be acceptable, along with the details which have been submitted in connection with clause 1.1.1 of the section 106 agreement, and those were the details set out on the written update sheets in respect of the play space. So the recommendations are therefore as set out on the update sheets. And I can just read those out. So that subject to a section 106 agreement to secure the deed of variation to amend the affordable housing provision, conditions 2 to 17 are set out on pages 44 to 50 of the agenda report. We've got amended condition 1 as set out on the update sheet, amended condition 7 as set out verbally, and informatives 1 to 21, and additional condition 18, that the reserved matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping be approved. Members will see that there is a recommendation B, that is in respect of the clause of the section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members? Okay, fine. Councillor Earls.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, my apologies for my late arrival, and I do realise that I wouldn't be able to take part in the vote on this application. But I'm a bit disturbed by the space standards, the internal floor spaces on, and especially for the affordable housing units. There's not a single affordable housing unit that will come up to the recognised space standards. Now, I know they're not adopted by this council as yet, but on page 33, we do say that officers consider that an appropriate standard of accommodation would be provided on site. Well, according to my maths, some of the one beds are 17.5% less than the accepted space standard. And I'm just wondering where Waverley are now going to set the bar for an appropriate standard. Is it 25% less than recommended or 50% less than recommended? It just seems wrong for us to be accepting affordable housing, which is going to be used for people on our housing lists and the more vulnerable members of society, shall we say, or the less fortunate members of society, will be moving into substandard houses, and I'm not at all happy about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Earls. Councillor Dean.
Thank you. Actually, that was a point I wanted to raise, but maybe I'll go in a little bit more detail. So we have 130 houses and 48 are affordable. Okay, so the government technical housing standards, and these are nationally described standards to meet certain internal space requirements in order to ensure that appropriate internal standard of accommodation has been provided for future occupiers. So these are minimum standards. So out of the 130 houses, 75 fail to meet these standards. 75. That is 57.7% failure. And if I got my maths wrong, please correct me. I mean, and as my colleague has said, all affordable houses have failed to meet it. And I actually think Berkeley Homes should be quite ashamed to put an application where the affordable homes are treated in this manner. I think it's absolutely shameful. And then you start to look at the 4-bedroom house, and surprise, surprise, some of them are up to 40 square metres above the minimum standard. Now, call me cynical, but that could be something to do with profits. And companies who develop and say in presentations they care about the community, they want to build a lasting estate that we can be proud of, well, clearly profit has come before, you know, the needs of the people. I just could not in any way, shape or form support this application that treats people in affordable homes so poorly as they have today. I've got a couple of other points, but I'll come back, Chair. A couple of points not relating to this, but I'll wait for other colleagues.
Thank you very much. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I have to totally agree with what my fellow members have said about the technical space standards. It is extremely regrettable, to say the least, that these houses are being built to such a small size. And to be honest, I cannot support this application based on those sizes. I would like to thank officers for working today so hard on this application, looking at the conditions and looking at the bridges as well, and the Nuthurst Stream Bridge. I'd like to thank them for all their hard work. However, this is a matter of judgment on the size of these houses. And although they are guidelines, they are minimum standards, and I think it is extremely difficult to justify passing an application where so many, as Councillor Dean has said, such a high percentage is of a lesser size than the minimum. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Not to echo too much of what's been said, but I think when we're looking at the pepper potting issue that we've had on some other applications, this is the other potentially more problematic side of that coin, where the houses are overtly a different standard to the other houses within the plot. And so for the reasons that have been highlighted already, I absolutely will not be supporting this application. It's very clear that the affordable housing is absolutely nowhere near the standard of the market housing. And I think if we are even setting a line in the sand as to what our standards are going to be, this is a good place to draw that. And if we've got minimums in our heads for a draft going forward, I think we should be sticking to those as early as possible. And so I'll be rejecting this application based on this alone. Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one area of clarification from officers. This is a subdivision of phase 2, and we're looking at 2.2, and I'm a bit confused as to why 2.1, which is submitted, is not actually being put forward either first or at least giving some indication as to why it's still pending. The second point echoes the other speakers. I think it's absolutely sad that having changed the mix in their update and looking through on this particular sub-phase, that the builders did not address the issue of the space deficit. And I would say a space deficit. It's also sad that this council, having had this issue cropping up a good 12 months or so, has not actually got some form of guideline or policy which allows us to impose those standards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, of course, we have got these standards in part 2 of the local plan. And one could almost say this is probably being brought forward as a cynical exercise to ensure that they were, or to try to ensure that it was passed before those standards actually applied, which they will do when part 2 is agreed by the council. So I certainly don't support this application on the basis of these large number of affordable homes which are too small by our anticipated standards. Thank you. And of course standards which already apply to houses that Waverley is building itself for council housing.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Byam.
My apologies for being a little late, Chairman. On the point of pepper potting, I have a great deal of sympathy at times with the housing associations that are dealing with these, that they feel to have the houses in a fairly tight location, perhaps a couple of places within a site. But I suddenly thought, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about before in any other meeting, but I'm going to broach the subject of affordable shared ownership. I don't think the housing associations will have responsibility for the maintenance of those properties. If somebody goes in and buys 70% of the property, I think, and I stand to be corrected and would love to understand if I'm wrong, that they will be responsible for their own maintenance. And therefore, pepper potting is not an issue. They don't need to be pepper potted. They can be spread anywhere in the site because they have to look after themselves. I don't know whether the officers are able to advise me and us generally whether my assumption is correct, but it's just something that I've thought of whilst looking and listening to what people have been saying.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the officers right now then if they could address the pepper potting and the maintenance of shared ownership.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry about that. Yes, my understanding is that housing associations grant long leases of shared ownership, and that the lessees staircase in by their way into the equity over a period of time. But during that time, very much as with any long leasehold property, the freeholder, the housing association, assumes the maintenance obligations of the property, and they are picked up away service charge, I would think, in terms of the annual residual rents that are paid. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Barry, for that. Has the pepper potting been viewed by our housing officers? Rebecca?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it has. And actually, I'm just looking at the comments that have been provided by our housing strategy and enabling manager. They understand the applicants have essentially approached the providers who would take them on, and the registered providers, and they are happy with the proposed layout. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman. On Monday night, many of us sat in this chamber and we spent an hour and a half debating an application very close to this site. And I know we look at each one on its individual merit, but after an hour and a half we came to the conclusion that we should defer because of a phasing issue. Again tonight, I don't want to spend any more time in this chamber than I have to, because I think the feeling here is one of total confusion, and absolutely endorse what has been said by Councillor Dinas. I think it's appalling, absolutely appalling, that one of the biggest strategic sites in Cranley, in the east of the borough, has come forward with saying what we're going to do is we're going to put all the affordable housing up that end of the development, and we're going to make them substandard, but we're going to have the very nice big houses down the bottom, and we're going to give you extra floor space. I think it's absolutely appalling, because what this borough is supposed to be doing is providing and making it accessible for people of a wide range, especially at the lower end of the income spectrum, to be able to afford these properties, and that's excluded it. I don't see how we can make a decision on this report tonight, because we still have... It's a very good report, I've got to say, but I found it very complex, and I found it very compromising and difficult sometimes, because it bounced from one thing to another. I never quite knew if I was reading about phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 2.1, 2.1, whatever. And I think the point made earlier about the 2.2 should be before us this evening. So this report contains 3 outstanding pending issues that the whole of the decision needs to be reflected. We need to wait for those decisions to be fulfilled before we can do anything with this. And again, it's that phasing issue. Are we now looking at an application that's phasing? We've got 4 phases, and now we've got 2.1 and we've got 2.2. And I'm really confused as to the 58 houses, which it's nice to see there's 8 extra, but if they're substandard, I don't think that's right. But if we look at page 25, going back to Councillor Byam's point, I think he's absolutely right. We've got this shared ownership. So is that where the additional ones are coming from? And does that not take them out the affordable housing of the being managed by a landlord? And what I would remember is many of us sat in this chamber when this application came before us before, and I don't want to be suspicious about this, but we were offered a carrot then, and we were told if we didn't take it, it would be removed. So we've been offered another carrot here tonight saying 58 instead of 50. So I've got my suspicions about this. Also on page 21, the police make comments on some of the parking areas that I think should be addressed. I'm sorry, I don't want to spend any more time on this than I have to. I think it's flawed with inconsistencies. I think it's disrespectful to the tenants and to the residents of Cranley who would be, or anywhere in the borough, who would want to buy a substandard house or live in an area where it's clear. And do you know the one thing, and I'm going to say this now and correct me, and please tell me off if I'm wrong, but when we looked at the local plan, part 1, we looked at that whole site in that part of the eastern part of the borough, and we were told then, yes, we have to look at the individual sites on their own individual merits, but we have to look at that whole site as being filled. And what I see now is a small, and sorry about going on about Monday night, but they're all down that far end where it makes sense, but what's going to happen to the bit in the middle? So you've got the affordable houses down there, and you've got the lower market value houses down there, and at the other end you've got the larger market value houses, and it just seems a little convenient that they should all be grouped in that one area to make it more attractive to the developer as to the people. I'm sorry, I can't approve it. I think it's appalling. It should never have come before committee.
Thank you very much. Just coming back to the Waverley standard. The houses we are building meet the minimum standards, and I think that's something that we should very much bear in mind when we are looking at other planning applications.
Chairman, forgive me for butting in, but can I just come back on that? Because one of the points I wanted to make, on page 33, it says all that, but the government set the standard, and here we're as I say, we're all singing from the same hymn book here. My post-it note says that all the affordable. But it actually says on here, it acknowledges that 39 of the proposed units would not accord with the standards. And it goes on to say, officers nevertheless consider that an appropriate standard of accommodation would be provided on site. What does that mean?
Right, okay. I'll come back first of all to Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just repeat my first question with saying I'm slightly confused. Where is 2.1 It says it's pending. What impact does 2.1 have on 2.2? And actually picking up with Councillor Farezeski's point, if you look at page 25, it's very clear the affordable rent stays the same, 37. The increase is in shared ownership. And I think that makes the point. And shared ownership has some consider dubious allocation of affordable, because shared ownership is not actually affordable to quite a few people. But we are effectively, percentage-wise, losing out on our affordable rent. But if I could have an answer to the 2.1, I'm sure that I'm not the only one who's a bit confused about this.
Councillor Gray, I offer my apologies. I had got a note here to ask the officers about 2.1, so can we, I think, Chris French?
Thank you, Chairman. Just in terms of phase 2.1, it is a separate reserve matters application, and it's for the land down here which is being highlighted, and there's no reason why they cannot split it in that way, and therefore it's completely acceptable for a large scheme like this to be divided into phases and in some instances sub-phases. So that's not a reason for us not to consider what's before us at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor James.
Thank you. Mine is also 2.1. Could the officers, because my maths isn't my strong point, if we're having more affordable, in inverted commas, on 2.1, could they tell me how fewer we are having on 2.2, or is that going to be another exclusive little development with no affordable housing? If they're swapping it over, how many on 2.1?
Thank you. I think that's 58, but I'll ask Rebecca to confirm that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so just to confirm, so there's going to be 8 more affordable units that are going to be provided as part of phase 2 than originally proposed. So that means that there are 8 less coming forward as part of phase 3. So the total number of affordable units across the whole site, so phases 1, 2, 3 and 4, will remain at 128, but 8 are going to be delivered earlier than originally proposed. So there's going to be 58 under phase 2, 63 under phase 3, and 7 under phase 4. And within phase 2, they're broken down as 48 to be provided under this current phase 2.2 and 10 to be provided under the phase 2.1. The phase 2.1 is for, I believe, 18 dwellings overall. 10 of those are going to be affordable, 8 are market. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Monner.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll be brief. I think the reason for correctly objecting to the small size of the affordable is that they offer insufficient residential amenity, which is a standard concern. We normally think of looking outside the homes for that, but these are so small that it would set a very bad precedent, I think, for other developers. So we owe it, for consistency's sake, to make sure we expect reasonable standards of accommodation for all affordable housing, whether built by ourselves or by others. I too shall be unable to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. Yes, I just seek a little clarification on the same subject, if I may. I remember, Chairman, from, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago maybe, with an application, same scheme that's coming up next on our agenda actually, we were looking at the affordable housing that was in there, which was affordable rented, I think, at the time. And some of those flats were larger than the market, private market saleable flats, because there were standards for affordable housing, whereas there were no space standards at the time for market housing, but there were minimum sizes for affordable housing back then, I'm pretty sure. I might be confused, I might have dreamt it, I don't know. And I'm wondering, does that still apply, if it ever did? I appreciate that we've got nationally the national space standards, and that's a set standard, and that will apply when we've adopted the Local Plan Part 2. But As far as this is concerned, and that doesn't negate from what Councillor Mulliner has said, I don't think, in terms of amenity, but do we still have, for affordable housing, or for perhaps for some classification of affordable housing, a minimum size that they must meet? Because I'm sure there used to be one. Or did I just dream that, Chairman?
Pass on that one. Again, I'll ask the officers if they have information there. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. We're not aware of any affordable housing space standards that previously existed. No. Thank you.
Fine. Thank you very much indeed. I'll come back to you in a moment, Councillor Adams. Councillor Nibby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you've seen the affordable houses sizes, I've got an experience with disabled people and pensioners. If you see the sizes in there, if you need to put any equipment, you won't have the size for it. And if you are not thinking of pensioners or old people, it's not going to be sufficient space for it. That's my point in the small affordable houses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Follett, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of things. First off, just regarding the space standards, I'm trying to put this in as delicate a way as possible. Officers nevertheless consider that appropriate standard of accommodation will be provided on the site on page 33. Considering the national space standards that we've got as the only real guide on this, could officers explain how they reached the decision that this was appropriate, considering the clear deficiency in the space? Thank you.
Just Rebecca.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I've just been making my way through the schedule of accommodation that was being submitted that I would have checked when I was doing the measurements. And I feel this is an appropriate time to say, I'm awfully sorry, but I think that there's been an error on my part with regards to that type 1BF. I believe that looking at what the measurements should be a minimum of 45. Now, I appreciate that's still below the space standards, but it is a little bit different. So please accept my apologies. I have just been checking those units that I've specified there and the space standards. So it is still below the space standards, but not to the same extent that I believe I've put in this report. So apologies for that. Therefore, so if we take the 45 as the lowest, it's a judgment at the end of the day, obviously, as to the discrepancy below the technical space standards and whether we are still satisfied that there is still sufficient space to be provided within each unit to be an acceptable, standard of accommodation. We don't have the local plan policy, so it is a judgment, and obviously members may come to a different conclusion than that raised by officers. Thank you.
Okay, so just on that basis, is there going to be a sort of standard judgment as to what is appropriate within the planning department? Because I imagine that assessment would vary from officer to officer. The other thing I was just going to say before I conclude, in the report itself, there was a distinct inference that the 8 were 8 more, whereas in practice it's a redistribution between the phases. And I would just like, if in future when reports say there are more and it's actually a redistribution, it clearly indicate that it's that and not imply that it's actually more when it's not.
That certainly came across in the verbal update. Councillor Adams.
Yes, I think, if I may, Councillor Hyman is mistaking the difference between council houses, which do have space standards laid down by the government, which we apply to on every occasion, and some of those, of course, were in Farnham. So that's when that situation would have arisen. I have a slightly different aspect to this, also really arise from something that Councillor Forozeski said. There is obviously a phasing plan. We've got one, we've now got 2, and then there's 3 and 4. Is the one that we're looking at now going to be completed before they even start phase 3? And if that's the case, how does all the construction traffic travel through phase 2? What provision is there to keep all the residents there in phase 2 safe? Because there's, 200 odd, by the looks of things, houses at least in phase 3. and you're going to have heavy vehicles going backwards and forwards, cement mixers, all sorts of things. So what provision is being made to make sure that the passage through phase 2 for the development of phase 3 is safe?
And phase 2.1.
And, well, phase 2.1, exactly. I mean, I don't see that we can approve phase 2 here, without knowing what impact is going to be put on it with the development of phase 3 and how long the difference is. I mean, is phase 3 going to start immediately at phase 2? Because we don't know. We haven't even looked at it yet. Or is it going to start 6 months after phase 2 is finished? Or is it going to start during the development of phase 2? I mean, it's quite a significant issue. And then, of course, you've got phase 4, which is in the middle of the other end.
Thank you very much indeed. Can the officers take us through the answer to that?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going through the conditions on the outline consent, and these are matters not for reserved matters. These are matters covered in the outline permission. I don't have the full details to hand about the construction plan, but that's clearly something that has been reviewed through the outline consent, and it's not a reserved matter that we should be looking at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. Just a couple of other points, not relating to size of bedrooms and houses. Page 35, charging points, and it just might be for clarity at a later stage, states each garage provided within the site will be equipped with a trickle charge point. So my question is, and I haven't checked every 130 places, have they all got garages? So if they haven't got garages, what's the position? Then it says 5 communal charging points. What about the blocks of flats? So I just think there needs to be some tightening up on charging points. But just one final very quick point. It was mentioned earlier about railway cottages. So it's page 31, the third paragraph from the bottom or the top, because it's in the middle, where it starts as acknowledged. And that was the one that was also raised by Surrey Police. So you've got a small parking area of 15 cars. Now, I suppose the point that concerns me, normally car parking will have lights, and they're quite high up, and you have railway cottages that's behind. So at some stage, I think we should consider a condition about the height of those lights, because if you have them up high, they're going to be in people's faces all the time. Every night, all the way through the winter periods. You can get the knee-height lights, which would be a lot better for the pollution. So there's 2 points, I think, if we are minded to approve, I would like those conditions just tightened. We normally have, every house has a charging point. I can't remember us ever having every house with a garage. And obviously blocks of flats, we normally do, is it 20% of the numbers that were within the, I think it's 20% of the ones in it. And I think we should be consistent that this application should reflect. That's it. Thank you for letting me come back.
Thank you. I'll just take Councillor Adams out of turn, because I think what Councillor Dean has triggered something in his thought process. Councillor Adams.
No, actually, Chairman, I'm returning to the point that I made just earlier. During the outline, there was no indication of how the phasing was going to be built out. And the first time this issue arose was when they asked for at the park phase 1. And we pointed out then, how is all the traffic going to get to the other side of phase 1? And they said, oh, well, it'll be all right, it's come through the empty site from the other end. So we're now at the point where this has arisen, where they're choosing to build the other end. So it is significant. You can't just say, well, because there was no phasing delivery plan during the outline, that we can now ignore it now. You can't. You have to say what provision is being made in phase 2 for access to phases 2 and 3.
Two, 1 and 3 and 4. Yeah. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I had the same concern over 3 and 4. I certainly understand what the officer said, that the applicants can submit it in any order they want. But equally, I think I would reserve my position to raise questions if I don't understand what the applicant's position is. They came through with phase 1, which basically we asked the questions there, as Councillor Adams have said. We've now got phase 2 broken down between 2.1 and 2.2. 2.1 is not hit before us, but it's interesting to note that 2.1 is 18 houses, of which 10 are affordable. That's a good percentage, but if I was to assume here, I would think that we're not going to get those 10 houses until the end of the whole site's being developed. So some of those affordable houses have been, basically percentage-wise, has been deferred to the end. And I really do have a concern about putting, for the people who are going to buy these houses, for putting in a 2 there and have the issue of the whole of 3 and 4 being developed. I really do think that's a concern that we have over the residential amenity for those people who are going to be there, for safety, to understand the phasing. Thank you for letting me come back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. When you put it like that, and you're looking from the outside in, what's the image our residents have got of us on this application alone? I think it would be one of sheer confusion, sheer mess, sheer cart before the horse. I mean, it is absolutely balmy. But having said all of that, this site does have history. For a site that only came before us in 2014, it does have quite a long history, and you'll see from your report that there's been 2 appeals, both of which has been allowed. Now, I'm not one to be blackmailed by anybody and have it suggested to me that if we don't determine this evening, the same will happen again. But having said that, I think this committee can send out a very, very clear message, not just to the Berkeley development, but to all developments across this borough, that we are not prepared to put up with applications of this nature before us. Because again, going back to the 2.1, 2.2, 2.1's got 10, 2.2's got 5, they're coming early, but there's actually no increase, and in fact you've got a decrease because some are being shared ownership. It just doesn't. And what if you don't develop at 2.1? What happens to 2.2? Balmy. So my recommendation to this council tonight is, as before, we defer this and we take it back to officers and ward members to liaise further, because we've got 2 choices here tonight. We can go for an outright refusal, or we can say, look, there's so much that's come out of this discussion this evening that warrants a full re-look at this application and come back to us with something that's absolutely acceptable, because in its current form, it is not acceptable, and I would rather see it deferred and then it come back. If it's not going to be deferred, I'm sorry, I will refuse this. I will say I cannot support the officer's recommendation on the basis of what I see tonight. Thank you, Chairman. So that is what I'm proposing, is to defer.
Before we go any further with that, can I just turn to Beth?
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify with members as regards to the phasing. Condition 8 of the outline plan required the submission of a programme of phased implementation of the scheme, which they did submit, and that was at the point where 2.1 and 2.2 were separated within phase 2. Within that, the phased implementation programme, there are dates for the implementation of each phase, with phase 1 being implemented first and phase 4 being implemented last. Also, under that outline permission, there's a requirement for a construction management plan, amongst other things, to require details of vehicle routing and health and safety issues. And whilst we can, I mean, we officers are happy to go back to the developers to negotiate on potential space standards within the units that are considered to be deficient, I'm afraid it wouldn't be reasonable to refuse it on the basis of the phasing which has already been agreed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Forresky, before we move on to look at deferment, I just wonder whether deferring would in fact allow us to see to the sizing and everything else. So it's a redesign of houses, and I just wonder whether deferment is the right way forward. Okay, I've got 3 people who want to come back immediately on that, so we'll hold that one for a moment. Councillor Follows, I think, first, and then Nabil, then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chair, for letting me coming back. Very, very quick. As much as I agree entirely with Councillor Foreszewski regarding putting a shot across developers' bow here, I actually really think we should. And I think actually in the 11 months I've been a councillor, gradually I've seen this committee start to actually take more of a stand on these things. And it's fantastic that it finally is. I think we can only make that stand by refusing it, because also I suspect that the things we're going to ask them to do are too substantial for a deferral, and it will have to come back to the drawing board. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Nabil.
Thank you for letting me coming back, Mr. Chairman. It's not only Councillor Frasinski's backup points. I would back up Councillor Adams as well, because I can't understand either. I've been looking in the papers how the transport is going to work and the lorries and everything going through all these phases. So I would, if there's going to be a deferral, I would second Councillor Frasinski and Councillor Adams' points regarding that. Thank you.
Shall we talk to the deferral first then, if Councillor Forresky is proposing one? Councillor Adams? Please do.
So can you confirm then that you've had a detailed construction management plan covering all the health and safety issues of access to phases 3 and 4 once phase 2 has been approved?
Beth, a minute? Okay, a couple of minutes. Yeah. While they're looking, Councillor Inchbold, where is it?
I'm over here. I'm here, Chairman. Officers have said that in their judgment, the spaces provided are sufficient. I don't think that I, as a councillor, can make that judgment. I feel that where there are clear guidance provided, and when the standards are going to be incorporated in our local plan, I don't think that I, as a councillor, could ignore that and use my judgment. I think that we have to reject this and send it back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Councillor Denis.
I slightly disagree with Councillor Foreszewski, and that's not very often we do that. And I can understand why she talks about a deferment. I don't think we can consider a deferment. I think we've got sufficient information. We shouldn't be deferring it on grounds that we can't actually influence, because some of that is talking about transport plans and if there are agreed plans. But we have clear grounds that these fail to meet standards and fail to meet the amenities of those occupants and future occupants. And I wouldn't support a deferment, but I would support, well, my views will be, you know, I couldn't support it and be a refusal. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Forresky.
Thank you, Chairman.
Over to you.
Completely understand it. I mean, I don't want to go for an outright refusal. Simply because I don't want to risk these 2 more appeals, as they've got history for doing so. But being you know, somebody who wants to perhaps negotiate and give someone the opportunity and show goodwill and all the rest of it. But whatever whatever this council decide tonight, I would not be able to support the officer's recommendations. So it'll either for me support the deferral and hope that they come back with something, or I would refuse it.
So are you going for a deferral at this point? Are you proposing a deferral?
I think, oh, Councillor Denis, you've thrown me there. No.
Right, thank you. You're withdrawing the motion. Thank you very much indeed. So we move on to Councillor Byam, I think.
Well, it was about the point about deferral. How can you defer an application where the whole site has got to be redrawn with different size houses and everything else to achieve what we want them to achieve? It just can't be done.
Fine, thank you very much indeed. Is there anyone else? Councillor Munn, I beg your pardon.
Going to argue against deferral for the same reason.
Beth.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that we discharged the construction method statement on 26th of June last year.
Which means?
Thank you, Chairman. Without looking at the detail, it means that we have looked at the construction methods proposed and we're satisfied that the details for vehicle routing, hours of work, parking of vehicle and site operatives and visitors, loading and unloading of plant materials, storage of plant and materials and construction of the development, erection and maintenance of security hoarding, wheel washing facilities, measures to control emission of dust and dirt during construction, scheme for recycling and disposing of waste resulting from demolition, means of protection of trees and hedgerows and access arrangements for emergency vehicles. All those details have been submitted and the Council is satisfied with those details which apply to the construction of the site as a whole. Thank you, Chairman.
Was that before phase 2 was split into phases 2.2 and 2.1? Beth?
The phasing plan details were agreed on 19th of April this year, so after the construction management plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Yes, we have. Sorry. Yeah, we have. Yeah. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to agree that I think the changes to the site are so considerable with the increasing the, potentially increasing the sizes of a vast number of the houses on phase 2.2 that I'd like to propose the recommendation that we refuse this application.
Well, we'll move to the recommendation shortly, but understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
I think one or two other people have indicated along similar lines already. But, yeah, Councillor Adams.
I didn't hear anything in that construction method statement which dealt with health and safety of travelling between completed and occupied homes.
Okay. Councillor James, do you want to come in while the officers are confirming?
Thank you. Then if officers know what the construction plan is, can they tell me, does phase 4 have to go through 2.1, 2, 2, 3, which might be split into goodness knows how, or is that going to come through phase 1? Because I think when we were dealing with phase 1 and no affordable and very smart, as one of our fellow councillors said, we did ask about access to 4 and they said no, it was going to come through the open site. So presumably now once 2.1, 2.2, 3 split into however many, the construction vehicles will have to go through all those sites to get to 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that was raised a little earlier as well.
But they've now got a transport thing.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. If officers would just confirm for us that this is a EIA development and that we need to know that information for us to be able to assess the impacts. We do have to assess the construction impacts. If we don't know that information at the moment, then as it would appear to be a possible significant effect, then we should refuse on those grounds alone, or as well, certainly. But you know, we do need to know that. For large developments, we have got protections that make sure we know what the consequences are before we grant consent and allow the development to commence. Thank you. If you could confirm that.
Councillor Goodrich.
Chairman, if I've heard rightly, what we've been told is that the methodology of health and safety and cleaning of vehicles and movements and so on was agreed before we agreed the phasing. Does the phasing agreement affect the matter that was agreed first concerning the construction methodology? Because the issue that Councillor Adams is raising about driving through one phase to build another phase was not on the table, as I understand it, before we agreed the phasing. And therefore, it seems that we've agreed things in the wrong order. Does that make any difference, I ask?
Thank you. I'll ask the officers again to give us their thoughts on this. Who's going to answer this one?
Thank you, Chairman.
Lewis.
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Goodrich's question, however the developer chooses to build out the development in terms of phasing, that will all need to be in compliance with the agreed method statement. So however the phasing ends up happening, it will need to accord with what has already been agreed. And in terms of health and safety, I think it's implicit, particularly in terms of the vehicle routing agreements, that health and safety has been considered. Further than that, I think that the developer will inevitably be under various other standards of practice, legal standards as well as professional standards that they will have to comply with, as would any other developer need to as well. So, yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers? Nothing else? Before we move to the recommendation, I just want to make sure that we have got the points raised earlier on about charging points for all and lighting standards, or the height of lighting within car parking areas. Are they conditioned, please? Councillor Story.
Just to say that condition 3 calls for charging points in every house.
Thank you. I got the wrong page. Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Just on charging points, yes, I know condition 3, and in fact it was referred to in the outline on condition 16. What I would ask officers to do is that when they're agreeing this is to make sure that the non-garage charging points are fast charge, that they are 7 kV. I don't think we can insist on that on all the individual garages, but certainly those community ones should be the fast charge. Thank you.
To meet the Surrey standard, I believe. Yeah. Members, bearing in mind the lighting one, is that conditioned? Appoint Councillor Denis. Chris French.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if there was thought to be a need for a condition for additional lighting or further details of the lighting, that's something we could secure via an additional condition. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, and members, Councillor Hyman.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just slightly concerned. You know, we're doing well on our planning performance, and I wouldn't want us to make a mistake. Can I please have some advice from the officers? I think I've got a feeling as to where the committee's, which way it's thinking at the moment, but are we safer to defer or to refuse? Which way is it legally, you know, which would be safer? I know nothing is 100% safe because it's somebody else's decision ultimately, possibly, but which would be the best way to go? Because I'm slightly confused as to where we would stand legally. Thank you.
Beth.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of resolving to refuse the application, obviously if they appeal that, the outcome of that appeal could impact on our performance. I can't predict what an inspector would find. In terms of deferring, there also carries a risk of non-determination, appealing against non-determination of the application, but we would hope that the developer would work with us to achieve a better standard of accommodation for those units considered to be deficient. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Well, I'd like to propose a deferral and go back to, and it's unfortunate I didn't come in to second Councillor Forozeski's. I think it was wise counsel, she said, that basically, yes, there's an emotion for rejecting this. If we ask them to defer, and if in deferring and responding to the space issues, they find they've got to redesign the whole site, then they should withdraw the proposal and resubmit it. So on balance, I would favour a deferral. I don't know, so let me propose it and see if I've got a seconder.
Do we have a seconder for deferral? Councillor Forozeski. Members wish to speak to the deferral?
Chairman, could we have some clear legal advice on the relative merits of it, please? Because I think we're getting some very confusing messages. What is the risk of being, I mean, if we defer, can the applicant appeal for non-determination, or would, given the practical fact that they're in bed with this for the next 4 years, would they be unlikely to do that?
Please, Lewis.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a risk of the applicant appealing for non-determination. I understand that the statutory deadline is not far away. So if we were to defer, it's quite likely that we would need to rely on extensions from the applicant in order to ensure that we don't stray past the agreed determination date. In terms of likely success at appeal, that would depend on our reasons, I think, for either refusing consent or deferring, if they are reasons based on the matters that have been reserved for your consideration, and they're based on planning judgments, then that may be a fair reason to refuse or defer. But if they're based on issues relating to phasing, they would, in my opinion, be far more susceptible to challenge and the award of costs in the event that those reasons were held to be unreasonable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lewis. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be voting for this deferral because I think actually we do need to take that hard line. We have a moral imperative to send a message to developers that they cannot take away a space on and standards from affordable housing and give it to market housing and for us to sit back and accept it. It is something that we must refuse in order to make that point. If it comes to appeal, we can happily watch a developer explain why they think affordable housing can be substandard, and we will go on from that point. I know I take a slightly harder line than most of the members of this room, but I think we'll only make that message by refusal. Thank you.
I think the use of the word "we" might be inaccurate. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Goodrich.
There's a risk of appeal whichever route we take, deferral or refusal. I think we have a better chance on appeal if we've refused it and given reasons, because the inspector will then know why the matter has not been determined and the issue that has to be resolved, than deferring, which on the face of it, on the paperwork, will just say that we couldn't make a decision. So I would not be voting for a deferral. I would be voting personally for a refusal, because I think it sends the right message and strengthens, in my view, the legal team may disagree, but in my view, I think we're in a stronger position on an appeal.
We certainly need to vote for the deferral first, but Councillor Forrescue, you want to talk on?
Oh yes, very briefly, Chairman. I did start off by saying we were here for an hour and a half on Monday and approaching the same again. I'm going to come to the same conclusion. I get it. We should be sending out a very hard message to these developers to say that you can't do that. And I don't think what we're saying this evening is we can't make a decision. I think what we're saying is let's get the clarification we need to make the right decision at the right point. And I actually sat through the Berkeley appeal and they were savage, absolutely savage, and we didn't stand a chance. So I've seen these people operate, and I think I would rather, because, and again, as a council, we can put out the message to say, come back with the goods, make them acceptable, live up to what we're actually saying, and be seen to negotiate, rather than take that hard line, which I absolutely think is appropriate. And then at least we all know, at the end of the day, if they decide to go to appeal, we can fight it tooth and nail. But these guys have got history, they've got clout, they've got money. I've watched them in action, and I think what we've got here is robust enough information to be able to sustain it. But the time wasted, I'm between a rock and a hard place, but I'm leaning now more towards a deferral, so as we can actually give them the option, be seen to be doing something about it, because at the end of the day, it's going to go one way or another, and they can be seen to make the choice what it's going to do to their perception. Are they going to work with us, or are they going to work against us? And that's not good for them. So I reinstate my seconding of the proposal to defer.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. Can I just ask officers to put up the list of the judgment for the agreement of reserve matters for tonight up there, the slide? So we've got on there the matters of judgment for determining this issue. It doesn't matter which developer it is or whether they've got clout or they can pay for big lawyers or whatever. We've got matters of judgment, design and visual impact, and impact on residential amenity. It was said earlier about the residential amenity because of the size of the houses. The percentage, there's 14 house types here that do not meet the actual guidelines, and it's a large proportion. It's how many? 53% of the houses, 58% perhaps of the houses, of the dwellings here. We are talking about, do we think this will have an impact on residential amenity? Nothing to do with, you know, working together or whatever. This is our matter of judgment we have got before here tonight. I won't be going for a deferral myself. I will be making a judgment on the impact on residential amenity due to the nationally prescribed space standards, and that's how I'll be reaching my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. We are still talking to deferment. Councillor Munner.
Yes, I agree completely with Councillor Goodrich. I think clarity is very helpful. I think we are in a totally different position to when we were arguing about whether the site should be developed or not. this is something where it's very difficult for the developer to take the moral high ground, given these standards are national and we're about to adopt them for ourselves, and they have the basic support that people should live in decent areas and shouldn't be cramped. And Councillor Nazir's comment about people with disabilities and not being able to fit their equipment in is also valid. So I think, in fact, we are in a very strong position. We're most unlikely to get a costs award against us, and the developer's sensible action is to basically put a fresh application in as quickly as he can, which has acceptable space standards. This will take him no more time and no less time than working on a deferral. And it's one.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we now move to a vote on deferral, please? Those in favour of deferring this application, please show.
1, 2, 3.
Those against?
1, 2, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Fine. Abstentions? Right. In that case, members, that motion is lost. Can we move? Do you wish to come back on anything else before I move to the recommendation, which hopefully I can read through all these notes? Correct me if I go wrong on this. I've got so many scribbles. Okay, recommendation A, that subject to a 106 agreement to secure a deed of variation to amend the affordable housing provision in relation to phases 2 and 3, conditions 2 to 17 are set out on pages 44 to 50 of the agenda report, an amended condition 1 and the verbal addition of condition 18 condition to ensure provision of community areas to meet space standards and condition regarding lighting standards. And informatives 1 to 21 are set out on pages 50 to 54 of the agenda report. The reserved matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping be approved. Those in favour of approval, please show. Those against, please show.
That's 18.
Abstentions?
1.
Thank you. So,
we do need to take recommendation B.
Okay. We need also to take recommendation B before we go to the alternative. Recommendation D, that details pursuant to the Section 106 agreement requirements in respect of a play space specification and play space management plan for WA 2014-0912, bracket Schedule 4, Clause 1.1.1, brackets, be approved. Those in favour of recommendation B, please show. 3, 4, me.
Chairman, can we just repeat that so that I know exactly what I'm voting for on it? Because I don't know, I'm not the only person here who's...
Okay.
Yeah, on the green sheet,
will the officers explain why recommendation B is in there?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so recommendation B is specifically with regards to the details that have been submitted as part of the current application in order to discharge their obligation under the 106 agreement attached to the outline. That is in respect of the submission of a play space specification and play space management plan. Now, the details for all of the information that have been submitted, that was set out in the written update sheet. It also was referred to in the officer report on page 33 of the agenda report. So this recommendation is still valid. It would be open to members to make a decision to, in relation to that recommendation B. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just suggest that as part of the rejigging of the site, that this makes this recommendation be perhaps not valid, because it could be completely and utterly changed. And if it's part of the application we have just refused, I fail to see how we can then put in a management plan for something we have just refused. Thank you.
Councillor Gray, and then I'll turn to the officers.
I just wanted confirmation that this is solely in relationship to 2.2 and doesn't have an impact on any of the other phases. Could the officers just confirm that?
Rebecca?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the application is solely for phase 2.2. So if members feel that the potential rejigging of the layout would be such that the areas of play would be affected and the equipment within those areas and the maintenance of those areas would be affected, then it is open to members to refuse the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Recommendation B is as written then. Can I have those in favour of recommendation B? Please show. None. Those against recommendation B?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Abstentions?
Yeah, that's 4.
Thank you very much indeed.
C,
that is lost, therefore.
C, no longer.
C is lost. Can I now ask for an alternative recommendation, please? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I put a recommendation forward for this application to be refused on the ground? Thank you.
A seconder, please. Councillor Denis. Speak to that recommendation to refuse. Councillor Foresky.
Absolutely agree, and I think
with
it's the
reasons.
Absolutely right thing to do. But what I would say is that our officers are encouraged to talk to the applicant to get a feel for the depth of despair and frustration having had to sit through listening to this in an application that's substandard. And that Councillor Mulliner made a very, very good point, which was they can come back with a new application. And I would ask our officers to err in suggesting that they take on board all the comments and they come back with a fresh application as soon as possible, because that is a good alternative.
Councillor Mulliner and then Councillor Good.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we need some reasons. And I'd just like to comment, on page 23, we've got a list of 12 determining issues, but they don't really seem to completely tie up with what's on the screen. I just ask as a general comment, we should always have complete parity between what's in the papers and what's put on the screen. I'm not quite sure where trees come into it, looking at the list on page 23. The important thing, though, is the standard of accommodation provision of amenity space is a separate one, and I think we should be refusing both on the impact on residential amenity and inadequate standard of accommodation, or if the officers so advise, purely on standard of accommodation, as that is in fact what the principal concern was. So perhaps officers could advise is it best to have just that or both?
Councillor Goodridge, while we're...
I was going to say the same.
Councillor Denis.
I was just scribbling a few notes and I put something along the lines of the design, layout and cramped accommodation of the affordable housing which fails to meet the minimum standards will have a detrimental effect on the occupants, future occupants' health and amenity. Something along those lines.
Thank you. And Councillor Numi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Councillor Adams' things about how they're going to do the construction could be in detail? No? All right. Sorry about
that. Councillor Ells.
Thank you. I would suggest that we don't limit it to the affordable housing, but use it. Yeah, to do it for all housing. Sorry, I thought Councillor Dean said just for the affordable housing. Right. Yeah, I think it should be all.
Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, having regard to all the comments that members have made, My opinion is the reason for refusal should be worded around the reserved matters which are subject of the application. So if I just read out what I've just jotted down based on the comments, the proposal by virtue of the layout and scale, which are the reserved matters, of the units, so that includes both market and affordable, would not provide for an acceptable standard of accommodation. This would be contrary to policy TD1 of the Local Plan Part 1, retain policies D1, D4 of the Local Plan 2002, paragraph 127 of the MPPF, and would not accord with the technical space standards. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Elson.
We should also include recommendation C, the details of that. We usually add those in as an additional reason that the legal agreement hasn't been, well, the deed of variation hasn't come.
Do you have? Who? Yeah, that's just going to. Officers? Includes. Yeah. Councillor Munner.
Chairman, two comments. Well, the comment is I don't think recommendation C can be relevant given that we've turned down A and B. And I'd like to, if I may, move that we refuse for the very good reason just given to us by the officer.
Agreed. Do you want to come back with anything else, Beth? No. Just be a couple of minutes.
Chairman, just to try and help things along, I think if you read recommendation C, it must be clear that it says that in the event of a deed of variation, it's not to be within 6 months of the resolution to grant the reserve matters.
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
No.
Therefore, it cannot be relevant to even consider recommendation C.
I thought we'd
yeah.
do that.
So I did propose that we accept the officer's wording of the refusal. Do I have a seconder?
You do indeed. Thank you. Rebecca? Right, we have a recommendation put forward, spelt out by the officers. Do you wish to be repeated? Lewis?
We don't need to just to clarify this uncertainty about our reasons in relation to the 106, we don't need recommendation C, but we do need, so we don't need to vote on recommendation C, but we do need an additional reason of refusal to deal with the fact that there is no 106 agreement at the moment. So it would be in the absence of a suitable legal agreement securing suitable deed of variation securing what is necessary, we refuse. So there does need to be an additional reason of refusal, but we don't need recommendation C.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether Lewis will correct me if I'm wrong, but obviously members have voted to refuse recommendation B, which was the 106 requirement. So by the very virtue of refusing that, I also think we need a reason for refusal for that. And I was proposing to tie that in to the refusal of the main application. So by virtue of the reason for refusal of WA 2017-2391, a satisfactory play space specification and play space management plan has not been submitted. So it just ties it all up. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. Do we also need to mention something about the Section 106 agreement with regard to the affordable housing provision, or is that not any longer valid at all? Thank you.
Rebecca.
Sorry, Chairman. I think we need to go away as officers and just confirm the legal position as to whether we actually need that reason for refusal in relation to recommendation B. We'll have that discussion, and as long as members are happy to agree that we will just check legally as to whether or not we need that reason for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think that recommendation A involves a deed of variation to put forward amended affordable housing proposals. In any appeal scenario, there will be a Section 106 deed of variation that will be proffering this revised affordable housing provision. So the resolution tonight has to take up the fact that they have failed to provide a Section 106 deed of variation in accordance with recommendation A. The other two recommendations dealing with affordable housing are unnecessary. Yeah. If that's the net effect, then that's our advice, Mr. Chairman. Thank
you. So, could we say that liaise with the Chairman and Vice Chair to determine this legal position? Right. Therefore, can we move to the recommendation to refuse that was stated by the officers in full a short time ago? Do you wish to have that repeated? No? Can I therefore have a show of hands? Those in favour of refusal, please show.
That's unanimous.
Unanimous, thank you. So that refusal is noted. That's the end of that particular debate. We will have a 2-minute comfort break, I think, and we'll come back to the next bit, and the chairman will change.
Members, if you could all take your seats and finish eating your bananas and things. Right. Okay, so the next item for consideration is application reference WA/2018-1678, Site B, East Street Regeneration, East Street, Farnham, as described on pages 55 to 86 of your agenda, and Ruth Dovey is to introduce this application. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, if I could just draw your attention to the update sheet that was circulated yesterday. There's quite a lot of information that was covered in that, and I will cover those aspects relating to air quality in highways in my presentation. There was also a further later update sheet that was circulated, which hopefully you've got, which relates to some amendments to two conditions in the agenda, and they are condition 6 and condition 14. I've also this evening received an objection from Farnham Town Council. So just by way of a verbal update, they object to the development on the following grounds. They strongly object to the removal of condition 11 in view of the impact this will have on local business at the key trading period of the year. They object on the grounds that no EIA has been conducted. They comment that if minded to approve, the A31 lane closure should be lifted during December to allow for the Christmas trading period. And they haven't seen any commitment made to longer working hours with the 24-hour road closure, and that extended working hours should be considered. And responses to these points are either covered in the report or the update sheet. So if I turn now to the presentation, we've got the location plan in front of you. This is a minor material amendment application relating to the provision of a temporary construction access bridge to the East Street redevelopment scheme in Farnham. So this locations plan shows the main redevelopment site outlined in blue. This is the application site outlined in red, and this relates to the construction of a temporary construction access bridge from the A31 over the Riverway, which follows this line here, and directly into the development site. And might be a bit faint, but you can see just here, this is the A31 running parallel to the application site. So this is the approved master plan for the main East Street redevelopment scheme. So planning permission has been granted within this site for a mixed-use redevelopment comprising 9,814 square metres of retail, a restaurant and cafe bar, use class A1, A3 and A4, including the change of use of Brightwell House and the Marlborough Head, 239 residential units, a multi-screen cinema, multi-storey service and basement car parks providing a total of 426 spaces, associated highway and access works, provision of infrastructure and landscaping, and a replacement facility for the existing Gostry Centre, demolition and clearance of the site. And you can see in the bottom of the right-hand corner here, this is a pedestrian access bridge which will be constructed once the development is completed. However, in the meantime, whilst development is going ahead, this would be the approximate location of the temporary construction access bridge. So this effectively shows you what was approved earlier this year at JPC. So this is the construction access bridge that was approved by the JPC on the 27th of June this year, and the reference number 2018-0544. The provision of the construction bridge was required by condition on the main permission in order to ensure that construction traffic was not routed through Farnham Town Centre, thereby causing congestion. The plans also provide for a diverged taper, which is the widening of the carriageway leading to the site access point, which provides a deceleration lane, allowing vehicles to slow down and turn into the access from the main carriageway. And as I've also shown you, that the development also included the provision of a permanent pedestrian bridge following the removal of the temporary construction bridge once the development has been completed. So the planning permission that was approved earlier this year for the bridge has been implemented, and so this photo shows the stage that they have got to. And on this top photo, you can see the A31 running along here, and that connection needs to be made between the A31 and the construction access bridge itself. So turning now to the proposed changes / removal of conditions. The approval of the dual lane bridge was subject to a number of conditions, 2 of which, conditions 5 and 11, are relevant to this application. The applicants are seeking to vary condition 5 of the planning permission, which requires no development to take place on the main redevelopment scheme until the bridge is constructed. This is to ensure that construction vehicles related to the main permission use the bridge rather than routing through the town. So the applicants are seeking to amend this condition to enable demolition of Brightwell Cottage prior to the completion of the bridge. This is required to enable the completion of the bridge. This is required to enable the completion of the bridge because it sits within the route as you come off the bridge, and also to allow for essential sewer and utility works to be carried out. And this element of the scheme may sound quite familiar to you because it's been discussed at 2 previous JPC committees in recent months and been found to be acceptable. So JPC approved the revised phasing plans for the main development that showed the early demolition of Brightwell Cottage on the 30th of July 2018. In addition to this, more recently, a non-material amendment application to vary condition 5 of the dual lane permission in this respect was also considered by JPC on the 3rd of October 2018 and committee resolved to grant approval. However, this application couldn't be determined because of technical legal issues regarding the applicant's interest in the land, and hence it forms part of the current application. So given the recent planning history, it wouldn't be reasonable for the committee to revisit the principle of demolishing Brightwell Cottage prior to the completion of the bridge. It has previously been concluded by the committee that the demolition of Brightwell Cottage prior to the completion of the bridge would not have a harmful highways impact, particularly given that all the demolition material would be retained on site until the bridge is completed, secured through the amended wording of condition 5. The applicants also wish to vary the condition to allow the installation and collection of welfare facilities in connection with the main development scheme and the removal of the tennis pavilion prior to the bridge construction. So these are items that have been requested by the applicants for the sake of completeness. As these changes reflect changes that were made via a non-material amendment application for similar changes to the same condition on the single lane bridge permission, and that was an NMA that was approved in 2015. So with regard to the welfare facilities, these works comprise misdevelopment and therefore could be undertaken at any time, and officers don't consider it would be reasonable to require them to be installed after the bridge is completed. Officers are therefore happy to make the condition explicit that they can be constructed prior to the completion of the bridge. With regard to the tennis pavilion, this has been removed under the 2015 NMA for the single lane bridge. As a result, there are no highways impacts arising from this. On this basis, officers consider reference to the tennis pavilion in condition 5 to be acceptable. So overall, given those considerations, officers consider the revised wording of condition 5 to be acceptable, and that revised wording is up on the screen at the moment. So then if we move on to condition 11, this condition states that any traffic management requiring lane closure on the A31 Farnham bypass shall not be implemented or take place before the hours of 9 AM or after 5 PM, Monday to Friday. And the applicants are seeking to remove this condition so that they can have 24-hour lane closure. It's always been acknowledged throughout the number of bridge permissions that there have been on this site that a lane closure on the A31 of some form is required to enable the connection between the bridge and the A31 to be made. This condition was attached to ensure that the lane closure does not take place during peak traffic hours in order to reduce the traffic impacts on the highway network at those times. The applicants are seeking to remove this condition to enable a 24-hour lane closure to take place during the construction of the bridge. So the applicants have submitted some information with regard to the removal of this condition. They have advised that the unrestricted lane closure would start on the 19th of November and would be undertaken until the 7th of December, at which point they would then have to cease the entire lane closure because Surrey County Highways have an embargo on that kind of work taking place in the run-up to Christmas. So they would then reinstate the 24-hour lane closure on the 7th of January, and its removal is anticipated towards the middle/end of January. So they've advised that an unrestricted lane closure would mean that the temporary construction access bridge could be completed in approximately 4 weeks, 6 weeks allowing for contingency. So in terms of the principle of the development, this has already been established through the approval of the dual lane bridge application earlier this year and its subsequent implementation. It would therefore not be reasonable to revisit the principle of this development. The key issues in relation to this development rest really with highways impacts and air quality impacts. So if I can just talk about the highways impacts first, the applicants have submitted a technical note that assesses the implications of a 24-hour lane closure on traffic based on updated traffic surveys undertaken in 2017. So these surveys show that the actual traffic flows on the A31 are lower than those forecast in the previous transport work accompanying the 2 single-lane bridge permissions that were approved in 2010 and 2012. So the consequential effect is that particularly with regard to the AM peak hour closure, there would be less impact than previously envisaged, but this also translates through to the PM peak hours. And it might just be useful at this stage for me to clarify that the AM peak hour is between 8 and 9, and the PM peak hour is between 5 and 6. The applicants have also submitted information that indicates that the bridge can be completed within 4 weeks, with 6 weeks including contingency, with an unrestricted lane closure. Set against this, the current position is that with a restricted lane closure, this would need to be in place for 16 weeks due to the hours lost in setting out removing the traffic management equipment to enable the lane to be open at peak hours. So Surrey County Highways have considered all the information submitted, and I've got Richard Cooper here from Surrey County Highways on my left, and they raised no objection to a 24-hour lane closure. They have the view that sufficient evidence has been submitted to demonstrate the restricted lane closure does not result in the intended benefits foreseen by the imposition of the restricted lane closure condition. Not least because a restricted lane closure is also likely to result in delays at peak times as a result of the knock-on impact of removing and installing such an extensive amount of traffic management equipment. Furthermore, Surrey County Council's objective is to reduce disruption caused by any roadworks to the shortest possible time. And therefore, it's concluded that a 24-hour lane closure over 4 to 6 weeks that is preferable to a scenario requiring a restricted lane closure for 16 weeks. So on this basis, officers are satisfied that development is acceptable in highways terms. So if I can turn now to air quality, and I have got air quality colleagues from Environmental Health here to answer any questions. An air quality report was submitted at the time of the original dual lane application, which modelled 2 base scenarios. They were the baseline, which was without the proposed development in 2019, and with development, and the baseline with the contemporary construction access bridge and a 24-hour eastbound lane closure on the A31 in 2019. So this report concludes that the overall impact of the development on the surrounding area as a whole would be slight adverse, and the report concludes that overall this impact is not significant. The Council's Environmental Health team have reviewed this document and are in agreement with its findings. On this basis, they raise no objections to the proposal. It is acknowledged that 1 exceedance is predicted at the Borough. This relates to an annual air quality objective, and it is likely that 4 to 6 weeks of unrestricted lane closures will have less impact on annual mean nitrogen dioxide concentrations than 16 weeks of restricted lane closures. Officers are therefore of the view that the development is acceptable from an air quality perspective. With regards to impact on residential amenity, there is no working at night proposed, and so there would be no harmful impact by way of noise and disturbance. So finally, if I can turn now to the issue of environmental impact regulations, the original dual lane bridge application was not accompanied by an environmental statement as it wasn't considered that one was required. This minor material amendment application doesn't seek to amend the approved development, it merely seeks to amend the wording of one condition and remove another condition. So on this basis, officers do not consider that the change would result in a development that would now be considered to be EIA development. So, in summary, officers of the view that the proposed 24-hour lane closure is preferential to a restricted lane closure, having considered all the information submitted with the original dual lane bridge application and this Section 73 application. Furthermore, the provision of a 24-hour lane closure would speed up the completion of the bridge, which in turn would speed up the delivery of this large redevelopment scheme, further reducing the time period for any potential disruption resulting from the East Street redevelopment as a whole in terms of construction. Given everything I've outlined, officers recommend approval of the application subject to condition 1 on the update sheet and conditions 6 and 14 on the late update sheet, and conditions 2 to 5 and 7 to 13 on the agenda report.
Thank you, Ruth. I'd like to invite the Ward Councillor, Councillor MacLeod, to speak, and then Councillor Beeman would like to speak on this one as well. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, this weekend marks the start of the Christmas festivities period in Farnham, with the turning on of the Christmas lights. And that there's 5 weeks exactly from this weekend till Christmas. And I'm advised by Surrey Highways that if Crest Nicholson are given permission this evening to do this, they will actually move from next Monday to start immediately and work for the 3 weeks until the embargo comes in. So in the 5 weeks between now and Christmas, or between then and Christmas, we'll have this disruption on the A31, and then there'll be a 2 weeks period in which it will be clear. Now, we all know in Farnham what happens when the A31 is disrupted. When grass is cut, or when there's highways maintenance going on, or an accident or whatever, the whole town centre becomes completely clogged up with traffic pretty quickly. And it's going to be worse, actually, in this time, because it's a very busy time. And it happens, unfortunately, to be happening at exactly the same time as the Woolmead project is going on. The Woolmead project has been causing lane closures for a week or two now while they board up the site. But from next week, they're going to start demolishing the Woolmead. And that's going to result in 80 lorries going through the town from next weekend. And that will continue for something like a 3-month period. And I'm advised by Surrey Highways that won't be affected by the embargo because they're not proposing to close any lanes. And all the demolition work will happen on the Woolmead site itself. But it will undoubtedly cause additional disruption within Farnham. So that's what's going to happen. And if Councillor Ford-Cheska was concerned about Waverley's image in relation to the previous application, if this happens in this way, I can assure you that Waverley, Crest Nicholson and Surrey's image is going to be extremely damaged by what will happen over the next few weeks in the period running up to Christmas. The traders in the East Street and Cambridge Place area are already suffering a loss of business due to the closing of the car parks because of the East Street project and the stuff in terms of the Woolmead project. Now, does this actually mean that I'm against this application and suggesting that you shouldn't do it? That isn't actually the case, in that I don't think we've got any choice but to allow this 24-hour working, because we were told originally when this bridge was allowed, that it was going to take something like 12 weeks or so to build this bridge. I was slightly confused by something that Ruth said, because she mentioned 16 weeks. I understood from the report, unless this is allowed, it would take 30+ weeks. I may have misunderstood something there, Ruth. Maybe you can clarify that. But it doesn't really matter. I think we've got to allow this extra time, but I would strongly say it should not happen before Christmas, because to disrupt the Christmas trading of Farnham in this way would be a very silly thing to do from the reputation of all the bodies that I've just mentioned. Now, I've advised by Ruth, in fact, I spoke to Ruth this afternoon, that this committee cannot actually condition it so that Crest Nicholson can't start. It would have to be done by Waverley themselves, as the landowner, as the partner with Crest Nicholson. So I would strongly advise Waverley to actually arrange with Crest Nicholson that they don't start this work till after Christmas, allow the Christmas celebrations in Farnham to happen in the normal way, and then they can start this work in mid-January or whatever. And I would, in that sense, in that case, have to support the extended time. I think I've just about run out of time now, Mr. Chairman. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Beeman.
Thank you, Chair. It's now nearly 6 months since the Dogwood Way car park was closed on the 28th of May for work to commence on the Brightwells development. Now, as you all know, I do not believe that the current proposals are appropriate for Farnham, but the reality is that this development is now going to be built. So there's no misunderstanding. I would like to emphasise that I've always supported development of this site, which has been neglected for far too long. It is therefore very difficult to understand why 6 months later we are now sat here questioning the need for essential work that needs to be undertaken for development to properly start. The access bridge from the A31 is essential to allow heavy goods vehicles to serve the development site if these vehicles are to be avoid using Farnham's already congested town centre roads, causing even greater air pollution, which is already higher than European guidelines. I welcome the decision to create a dual rather than single carriageway access bridge, for which work was due to commence on providing the required slip roads from the A31 on the 1st of October. In my opinion, this work should have been undertaken months ago, possibly during the summer school holidays, and completed by now. Then, when work was actually due to start on the 1st of October, a discrepancy was discovered in the planning permission, with condition 11 being which severely restricted the time during the day when work could be undertaken. The question still needs to be asked, why attention not been drawn to this problem before? Did not anybody at Crest Nicholson actually read the conditions attached to the current planning permission and realise the practical implications? The past, however, cannot be changed, and we have what we have, and continue to cry over spilt milk will actually achieve absolutely nothing. The time has come to accept the reality that Brightwell is going to be built and that action needs to be taken to minimise the impact on the town whilst development takes place. I therefore fully support the proposal to remove condition 11 and hope that Crest Nicholson will now take full advantage of the removal of this condition and undertake the necessary work as quickly as possible, including, if necessary, night and weekend working on Saturdays and Sundays, to complete this essential aspect of the development. The report before you states that it could be completed in as little as 4 weeks, and that's without night working. And hopefully this can be realistically achieved. One previous councillor who was portfolio holder with responsibility for East Street, Adam Taylor-Smith, once described the scheme as being shovel-ready, and it's about time this shovel was actually used. But, is it right that we should now start this just before the Christmas trading period, and then pack up and then come back again? I would support the plea that consideration given that this work does not start until after Christmas.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. Members, Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillors Beeman and MacLeod. I think that puts a lot of what I was going to say into much better context for Farnham. So obviously this relates to one of the more divisive matters, but I agree it's our duty to make sure now that this is as minimal in disruption to the residents of Farnham and its businesses as possible. So I have a few questions for officers as a result of that. So have any other alternatives been considered and evaluated, or only this version that Crest has put forward? I ask this just because I want to check that we're doing what's best for our residents as opposed to what's best for the development. And you also say no working at night. Can I ask why that's been ruled out? Because it would appear to solve a number of the issues that we're discussing. Very pleased to see someone from Surrey Highways here, so I hope we can discuss these in real time and actually come to a conclusion in the room, especially as it seems that Waverley, as the landlord, can make some of these decisions as well with regards to what Crest actually do. I think there probably is some room for alternatives. I think particularly one idea might be to only close one of the lanes in peak time and defer some of the lost hours to the night, which both during the Christmas holidays and also because of where we're talking about would probably have relatively minimal impact, although that would probably need to be assessed. I would also like to just echo what the Town Council has also said tonight, and also my colleagues in Farnham have also said. Have you actually assessed the impact on Farnham businesses during this Christmas period, but also the wider period afterwards? A number of them even reached out to me as a Godalming councillor, as a neutral party, so that I think that underlines the strength of feeling that Farnham businesses have if they're reaching out to me. So I hope that there's been some assessment of that. And finally, very pleased to see some reps from environmental health, because air quality, I think, here is going to be a serious issue. I would just like them, if they would talk us through some of the mechanisms in place to monitor the impact on air quality that this may cause. And also suggest that would different working patterns, such as working at night, actually assist in the mitigation of any potential air quality issues, or this high point that you referred to? I mean, is there better working patterns that could be undertaken? So after this, my intent is to listen to the rest of the debate, see if there's any more alternatives proposed. I would be minded to motion for a different alternative view of what we've got here, or move for a deferral till after Christmas, where in the meantime we could discuss and properly assess alternatives instead of just picking the one that Crest gave us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'm right in saying that we were never planning to close both lanes, only ever one. It's a lane is
No, sorry, right. So if I could, I'll clear up 2 points of potential confusion. So it's only one lane that would be closed, and the other possible point of confusion is to do with what the situation would be now with the restricted condition on in terms of how long the lane closure would be in place. Councillor MacLeod is correct that in the officer's report it refers to 30 weeks because that's what we were being advised by Crest at the time of the drafting of the report and the report's publication. They've now done some more detailed work on that. So as it currently stands with the restricted lane closure, we would be down to 16 weeks. If I could just touch on a couple of other points. There is a lot of concern in the room about the fact that there would be a 24-hour lane closure in the lead up to Christmas. We do have to bear in mind that under the current permission, they can still undertake a lane closure, and that could be implemented tomorrow, Monday, or any time before Christmas between now and the 7th of December. So I think that is just a factor that needs to be borne in mind when we are considering the implications of having a 24-hour lane closure in the build-up to Christmas. They could still have a lane closure of some sort under the terms of the current permission. And in terms of that timing and when the lane closure happens, that isn't something that would be controlled under planning. That is not a planning consideration, and we couldn't condition development to that effect. That would be very much something that would be within the control of Surrey County Highways, who I believe already have a Christmas embargo on lane closures that runs from the 7th of December to the 7th of January. So there would be no lane closure between those periods, but maybe Richard can just pick up on that in a bit more detail.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so just to clarify, between the 7th of December and the 7th of January, everything would have to come off the A31. So all works, all traffic management, that's the cones which are reducing the carriageway from dual to single lane, and also the working area, which will obviously have terrace fencing, more substantial barriers where they've got plant and construction vehicles. All that would come off, so effectively would operate with the two lanes. I think just to pick up on the off-peak issue, we've been pushing Crest really hard and to minimise the number of weeks that they're obviously going to be utilising the lane closure for. Initially, they came in with the 30 weeks for the off-peak, and by maximising working hours during the day, they're obviously confident in a 16-week programme. But I think I totally agree with Councillor MacLeod. I think even in off-peak times, we have significant disruption to traffic on the A31 when there's a lane closure, whether that's grass cutting, emergency roadworks, repair of street lighting, for example. And in that scenario, we have traffic obviously queuing and people finding alternative routes through the town. So that's already happening in the off-peak scenario. Yes, a 24-hour closure would make the level of disruption worse than that, because obviously traffic flows during the AM peak is highest. And there would obviously be routing of traffic through other routes. But for the County Highway Authority, to restrict the disruption to a much shorter period, 4 weeks with contingency 6, compared to having still a pretty significant, as we know, as members know from probably being stuck in these when there's roadworks on during off-peak times at the moment, it's still a significant amount of disruption to have that for 16 weeks. You know, I think the 24-hour option, by maximising the number of working hours that they're allowed to by the other conditions on the bridge permission, is the most effective way of constructing the temporary access. We are restricted to the working hours that are set down in the permission, which is, you remember, Ruth?
Yeah, so we currently have a construction environment management plan that restricts the working hours to between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. So they are the hours that are currently proposed. We haven't looked at any alternatives with Crest. It's really been a case of them submitting this application and us deciding whether it is this particular proposal is acceptable in planning terms. So I appreciate that members might consider that there are more appropriate solutions. They may have preferable solutions to this, but from a planning perspective, we have to consider what is before us, and we consider that what is before us is acceptable.
Just to clarify then, are we empowered to change the condition that set those working hours? So could we effectively enable night working? And would the Highways representative comment as to whether in such a scenario the night working would be allowed?
The issue of night working, I'm looking back at the original 2012 permission, that was specifically addressed in the transport statement at the time. I think, I wasn't around then, but it says there were noise and lighting pollution implications of working overnight. As you know, we do works on the A31 overnight when we had some resurfacing works in recent years. But there are obviously other health and safety implications of workers and the amount that they can do. I'm not an expert in actual construction as a transport planner, but all I can say is the advice I've got from in Surrey County Council, it's effectively split into, Surrey Highways is effectively split into two key areas, the planning side and my colleagues in what you would call Surrey Highways. The Streetworks team are effectively who give permission for any developer, any company to work on the highway. They have been working very hard on this, obviously, to minimise disruption. And the clear message that obviously has come out, and I'm reporting to you tonight, is that the 24-hour closure was the quickest way to reduce the number of weeks that they're actually constructing. I suppose what's been put to us by Crest is the 24-hour solution, and I can't tell you here tonight that I can give you a particular steer on, say, an overnight, because there are, outside of your planning consideration, there's obviously a significant number of health and safety and Highways Act requirements for doing this kind of work on such a strategic, important bit of road. And so I can't tell you that for definite that an overnight closure would be acceptable or otherwise. But Crest have presented to us an alternative, which is the 24-hour closure, and we focused on that. So that, to confirm, that is the only alternative that we have.
So just for my own, and apologies if this is glib, it is the best scenario, but no other scenarios have been evaluated.
I suppose I'm trying to say that it's the most effective scenario that our Streetworks, our team that licensed these closures have put to me as being acceptable. we haven't put forward to them a night closure because that's not something that's part of the application or the Crest have said they want to do. Yep.
Thank you.
Up on point, Chair. Just on the Wallmead development, I've got an update for members on the progress with the demolition of the site. So at the moment, there's actually pretty minimal activity going on in terms of vehicular movements because it's a gang of workers coming to the site every day just to start the actual demolition of the building. There's obviously all the plant on the site. So I spoke to Berkeley Homes this week. They've confirmed that between now and the end of January, there will only be 5 to 10 movements per day, which is effectively bringing vans and workers into the site. After January, it's going to gear up quite considerably because that's when they have to start taking the aggregate out of the site. And that's when you'll start getting the kind of movements that Councillor MacLeod just referred to. So one of the benefits, of getting the temporary access in as soon as possible, and if obviously before the end of January, is it won't conflict with the increase in movements from Wallmead that will start as a sort of beginning of February onwards. So I suppose that's something else in terms of just practical coordination of the movements from each site. As I say, up until the end of January next year, the Wallmead is going to be pretty insignificant. And then after that, it will start building up, and obviously it will be lorry movements as well coming into the town centre to remove all that aggregate that's been demolished over the starting now. So that was just a point I wanted to add on the Wallmead.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, condition 5 alterations, fine, no problem. Condition 11, I agree in principle that it's best to have short pain rather than prolonged pain, provided the pain is at the right time. Various questions and comments. Firstly, would it be possible for the other half of the Highway Department not to give a licence for closure until the 7th of January, for example, on the basis that between now and the 7th of December really is undesirable to have disruption twice rather than one lot of disruption, which the locals can get used to. They know it's going to happen and they know they'll just have to grin and bear it. So that was the first thing, that asking the Highway Authority whether it would be possible as one of the means of stopping anything happening before Christmas if the Surrey County Council refused to give a licence, if they could, and how strong would their hand be if they decided to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is to ask the planning department, obviously one of our matters of judgment is impact on residential amenity, and if we were working after 6 o'clock at night and before 8 o'clock in the morning, will it have, bearing in mind, I appreciate the site as a whole, it's bad news, but how much residential is there that would be disrupted if, for example, permission was granted, and I appreciate we have to deal with the application before us, but if we indicated that 10 o'clock at night would be fine, to try and reduce the pain of the highway closure. I mean, mention was made by our county council expert that health and safety and so on and so forth for working at night, but of course the practicalities of it is between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock at night, it's going to be dark anyway. Presumably they're going to have to put up some floodlights of some sort when they're working on this site, and therefore it doesn't seem to me any worse to be working at 5 o'clock at night than 10 o'clock at night, because it's going to be dark whatever happens. Because I would like to try and reach an end result, which means that the hours will be longer, that it'll all be done in one go, and that that, in my view, would reduce the pain that is inevitably going to happen. And I would just like advice from the officers as to how, if members felt that that was the good thing to do, how in a practical way, either as landlord, Surrey County Council not granting a licence to closure, us inviting and doing it as an amendment to Chris Nicholson to suggest longer hours, not necessarily all night, but till 10 o'clock or midnight or starting at 7, because there's nothing more frustrating than being a motorist driving past a building site, having been held up and finding there's no one doing any work there at all. I find that very frustrating when you've been waiting, and therefore anything to encourage work to be taken for longer than is being proposed, overnight if necessary, to reduce the pain, the better.
A question for officers before you answer Councillor Goodridge's point. The working hours, were they fixed on a condition? Are they conditioned of the...
They weren't fixed on a condition. When
Right.
the Construction Environmental Management Plan was submitted, they were listed as being from 8 till 6. And I would imagine that's born out of previous single-lane bridge permissions where overnight working has been discounted, as Richard Cooper said, for the issues of noise and lighting implications. So if I can just take you to the sort of the scenario that would play out if we were considering if we consider overnight working. So two key documents that have been approved that contain the current working hours in them are the Construction Environmental Management Plan and the Construction Traffic Management Plan. So the applicants would have to submit an application to vary those documents. They could potentially re-discharge those conditions, I think. I'll just have to think that one through. But in order to do that, I think it's highly likely that we would have to require a noise report and details of the lighting and the implications of the lighting on neighbouring residents to ensure that that overnight working would be acceptable. Because we have, just to answer, we've got residential properties here and we've got residences here. I mean, I suppose if I can just pick up on Richard's point in relation to Woolmead, if we go down that avenue, and obviously as members you're perfectly entitled to go down that avenue, we do potentially miss a window of opportunity where construction traffic from the Woolmead development at the moment is relatively low. We can get the bridge, if we agreed to this 24-hour lane closure, but without the overnight working, so if we agreed to this application this evening, we could potentially get the bridge constructed before the significant increase in traffic occurs on the Woolmead development, which is a benefit. So I think committee just need to be aware of the implications of any delays effectively to concluding this application, and then it's up to you to make a judgment which way you go.
Thank you, Ruth. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's 4 minutes to 9, so hopefully get this sorted. I've just found a few things actually in the update sheets which have concerned me slightly. One is on the plans. There seems to be a slight discrepancy in the plan numbers that have been introduced, so I'd like an explanation on that, but I'll come to that in a second. If I can first of all go to the page 7, which is the East Street white bit of the update sheet. So the two-part green and white update sheet that we got, which is the first one. So at the bottom of page 7, it refers to the Waverley-Letchford transport assessment, and it's talking about that doing with their new figures and a Linsig assessment, Waverley-Letchford have managed to show that the morning delay will be 8 minutes instead of the 12 originally predicted, and the evening peak would be 2 minutes instead of 7, which is sheer fantasy. I don't know whether you've read the letter that you got, the email I have that I got from Dave. David Howell from Farnham Society, which explains how he was driving around on the 4th of October, and we know what happened also on the 21st. These are off 21st of February, when we've already trialled this twice. Off-peak is a lot worse than anybody is saying. It gridlocks the place. At the bottom, halfway down page 8, so having looked in, you know, they've turned around and they've told us that this is, we've assessed it and it's going to be only a fraction of the problem that we thought it was going to be. But they then say, you see the paragraph that's sort of roughly in the middle, it says, with regard to the traffic signals at the Hickleys Corner Junction, the County Highways Authority will continually monitor when necessary, optimise the signal timings at the Hickleys Corner Junction. This would, well, actually what Abley Letchford said is that they have optimised it in their testing, so it's not that Surrey are going to come along and do it later or anything. This has been put in, and it's a proposal, it appears, that you guys don't know about, and I'm saying be careful what you wish for, because it says this would enable the amount of green time on the A31 to be increased while taking care not to cause excessive queuing on Station Hill and South Street approaches, nor to compromise the pedestrian crossing phases. Well, they're not taking anything from the pedestrian crossing phase. They're taking a number of seconds from each of Station Hill and South Street. Now, if people who live in Farnham or drive through Farnham know what that will do, because you've only got, I think it's something like 11 and 18 seconds for those phases, and you take 4 seconds or more out of each of those, and you are causing havoc for the town centre and all the... And that's how they've turned around and said, hey, this is going to be acceptable in terms of the bypass, because we're going to completely clog the town and Tilford Road and the station and everything else. So be careful. Please think about this. So I want officers to confirm that I'm correct on that, that is what is, you know, the situation we're facing. Obviously, given the advanced stage that the construction of the A31 access has reached, it's going to be silly to try and stop its construction. Its completion. Nobody wants to do that, although the main scheme, of course, is still changing. So it's not a matter of just build it. Hey, they haven't designed it. We've got more planning applications that are going to have to come forward because we've got a different drainage scheme. We've got a dog flood access scheme, which haven't had a planning application for, and all sorts of stuff, and new FRA because there's more land raising in the floodplain. But this here, what we've got in front of us is a fresh application. It says so on page 70 of your documents, the officer report. As far as I'm concerned, it's a subsequent application for the Brightwell EIA project, because that's what the law says. If you look at Regulation 2 of the EIA regs, that's the definition this fits. So it is EIA, and it's certainly looking to implement the EIA project for East Street. So, you know, we shouldn't be messing around with that and pretending. Now, the application is also a bit deceptive because the Abley Letchford note says that the 24/7 lane closure was accepted in 2010. It was not. Air quality...
Could you sum up, Councillor Hyman?
Well, nobody else has been timed on this, Chairman. I noticed that all the other speakers that we've had haven't had the timer on, so I'm a little bit disappointed.
They haven't gone anywhere near the 4 minutes either. So
well,
I have other people that wish to speak.
How would you know if you hadn't timed it?
I'll give you a little longer, but please come to your point.
Well, OK. I mean, these are important points, Chairman. In November 2010, the Air Quality Officer, which was Anna Pucciato, noted that she stated, and it was in the Regulation 19 request for further information, which Mrs Sims signed off, and in there the demand was, it said, there is a lack of clarity in respect of the effect of the phasing of the Royal Deer traffic lights. There is no modelling of how this junction would operate. And the problem that we have here is that this isn't just an application for putting the thing in place, the construction access. It's also got to be taken out at the end after the Royal Deer Junction and pedestrianisation scheme, which haven't been modelled, have been put in, are in place. So there's an in-combination assessment of gridlocking the town and gridlocking the bypass at the same time. We're giving consent to that, even though what we want to get the thing built now in place, to grant consent now, we are consenting total gridlock for 16 weeks at a later stage, which would completely kill the town. But more to the point, it has never been assessed. As the air quality officer said in 2010, that's why the 9 till 5 restriction was put in place. I know people who don't understand that, but the reason for the 9 to 5 restriction was so that Crest could turn round and say, hey, no traffic's going to divert through the town because it's
Okay, I
off-peak.
think you've made your point now, Councillor Hyman. I don't know if the officers want to address any of your points, but I have other people waiting to speak. So,
okay, thank you, Chairman.
Barry, do you wish to speak?
Mr. Chairman, we legal officers consider this is not a subsequent application, as it does not fall within the definition of such in the EIA regulations. It's not required by or under a condition to which the main bridge permission is being built out. And the second, a limb, it must be obtained before all or part of the development of the planning permission may be begun. So that limb is not made out either. This is not a subsequent application requiring further EIA. That is our advice, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, thank you, Chairman. We've got 4 conditions we're being asked to look at, 5 and 11, 6 and 14 as well. Is that correct?
6 and 14 are just sort of really tidying up some matters. So,
well, thank you. But we are considering them tonight.
Yes, essentially.
That was what I wanted to know. I agree that amending condition 5 is not controversial, and condition 14, which gives additional protection to trees, is not controversial. Condition 6, I'm not sure is as uncontroversial as tidying up, because the existing condition refers to reinstatement of all the green areas. It says at the moment, upon completion of the development and prior to occupation of the development, and then curiously approved by 1st December 2022. That seems to me to mean that it's got to happen before any of the buildings are occupied. And yet the amendment is substantially different, saying prior to the occupation of building D4C, brackets, the last building to be completed. Now, it seems to me that that is a very major change. And I would like to have enough time to understand that we're not basically leaving the place as a tip for perhaps months longer than is currently planned. But if I just park that one, that is the concern. On condition 11, I was greatly assisted by councillors MacLeod and Beeman, who both feel that the quicker option is desirable. My own sense, having looked at the numbers, is that I wasn't sure that it was, but I do understand from Richard Cooper that actually the situation in the town off-peak, although perhaps you could clarify, if there's no lane closure in the off-peak, presumably things go fairly smoothly. Is that correct?
So, thank you, Councillor. Off-peak at the moment, without any roadworks, yeah, it's the junction's operating within capacity. But as soon as you restrict it to one lane, even in off-peak, the junction's saturated, so you're over 100%, and that's when traffic flow starts to break down quite quickly.
Thank you. So am I right to think that under the existing condition, you get a smoother flow during the peak hour from 8 to 9, but then you have difficulties for the rest of the day?
Correct, and also because of the need to take quite a bit of time to set out quite an extensive amount of TM, you're cutting into the shoulders of the peaks. So,
could you avoid acronyms, please? TA means?
So transport assessment, sorry, TM, so the traffic management. Obviously, if you're working off peak, you're starting to put it out at, say, 9:30, when traffic flows are only starting to just go down. So you've got that knock-on impact.
Thank you very much. And also, of course, it is not the time when the businesses are at their most active. But I do say I support Councillor Goodrich's and Councillor MacLeod's and Beeman's suggestion that we should not do this until after the new year. It seems to be needless, even though there will be some overlap with the Woolmead development, to cause this pain this side of the Christmas season, given the effect on the businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows, you wish to come back?
Yes, firstly, just to quickly ask the air quality experts in the room if they could elaborate as to whether there is any noticeable difference in air quality matters if there was night work undertaken instead of day work. I think just to clarify that. And then I think I would like to explore a motion to defer. I'm obviously a lone member, so I don't even have anybody to second, but I hope maybe there might be somebody in the room who would. A deferral to defer this until after Christmas, for the purpose being to A, protect the Christmas period for Farnham businesses, but also to properly assess whether matters such as night working or other alternatives could be properly explored in that time frame.
Perhaps we could have an answer to your question about air quality, and then if you wish to make that proposal, then we'll follow that procedure through.
I think it's fair to say that the only issue that's been identified is in the borough, and the issue of concern is against the annual air quality objective for nitrogen dioxide. So that's an annual mean. So from an air quality point of view, there the emissions will come from traffic, particularly stop-start queuing traffic. So, you know, to have the least impact on the annual mean averages there, the shorter time the work takes with less queuing traffic, the better. And I think earlier I noticed you answered a question about monitoring. I'll confirm we monitor nitrogen dioxide in the borough, and we'll continue to do so against the air quality objectives.
May I just come back on that? I concede it's better to do it quicker. I absolutely do. But is it better to do it at night when there aren't people around physically breathing it in, or less? Or is there less stop-start traffic because at night there is less traffic?
I mean, from the point of view, if you've got no people there, then you know people aren't going to be exposed to additional emissions. But what I would say is that the levels that we're currently monitoring there, it looks like that there are likely to, you know, or if there might just be marginally exceedances of the annual air quality objective. So, you know, I think that's. From the point of view, I guess that you've got less traffic around during the night, then yes, it might have less impact. But
then I would argue that reinforces what I'm going to say now, which is a motion to defer this until after Christmas to consider alternative options, including the impacts of air quality and night working.
Do you have a seconder?
Sorry, Chairman, just before we debate that, I wonder whether I could have an answer to my question.
We can't debate it until we've had a seconder.
Okay, well, I'm happy to second, Chairman, but I asked whether it was correct that you know, that what we've got in front of us actually assumes shorter phases for Station Hill and South Street. And I think members need to know that's a very important matter, that this is, you know, something serious that needs to be looked at. And I think it would be a great idea to look at it over the Christmas period and give Creston officers a few weeks to make sure, because that would be horrendous. I mean, far worse than what we experienced on the 4th of November and on the
right, let's see if we can get an answer to that question then, can we? Richard.
So, as is, I suppose, normal procedure to granting any roadworks on the highway, the Streetworks team have been talking to our traffic signals, and I suppose it's not going to be a static situation. You know, it's constantly monitored throughout any roadworks, whether or not any signal timings need to be adjusted or readjusted to increase the green time, obviously on the roads that have got the lane closure, whilst not causing ridiculous amounts of disruption on the other arms, in this case South Street and Station Hill. So I can confirm in this case that the signals team have said yes, they would be altering the green time by what's indicated in the report to give A31 eastbound just that bit more green time to get as much traffic through as possible. But it's not static, it's because it's constantly monitored, and the TM has to be dynamic. And I suppose the other point to make out is that as an authority that's authorising roadworks on our highway, whether this is off-peak or peak, or 24-hour, if anything is happening that is starting to obviously cause a highway safety problem, and the kind of problems that perhaps some of the members are concerned about, then we have the power to get those, roadworks, get those lane closures removed. So I suppose, again, it's coming back to planning hat on, but also just as an authority that manages roadworks, it's a constantly evolving situation, and whether it's off-peak or 24-hour or night working, as has been suggested by Councillor Follows, it's not put it out from day one and leave it there and let press get on with it. It's our people down there every day monitoring it and adapting it if it needs to be. I suppose just picking up on the traffic flow issue through the town, actually all the survey data has shown that there's been no material growth in traffic in Farnham since the original reports were done on air quality and EIA. Obviously, I'm not an expert on those, but in terms of the traffic flows that have informed them, not only obviously you've got the developers' CREST surveys, but your own transport work that informed your local plan part 1 by Mott MacDonald that Waverley commissioned also confirms that between 2012 up to 2015 that there again was no it was a sort of a constant flow traffic volume. So certainly the EIA has considered a 24-hour lane closure on the impacts of traffic going through the town centre in EIA and air quality terms. So I just thought it would be helpful to confirm that I'm happy that those traffic flows that are in those reports are still fit for purpose, because as I say, all the data, not just from the CREST, but from your own reports that have informed the strategic transport assessment for local plan part 1 has also confirmed that. In terms of the point about postponing the roadworks till after Christmas, yeah, I can't give you a direct answer to that because I don't work in that team. I suppose my thoughts on it there's no reason, if something else happened on the A31 between now and the 7th of December, for example, statutory undertakers needed to get in there for emergency repair or gas, any of the statutory services, we would have no reason not to let them go in until the 7th of December. So I suppose we would be making an exception for this particular roadworks. And I'm not sure where the county would stand on that, both from following the requirements of the Highways Act, but also our own protocols for allowing roadworks on the highway. So if members did decide to defer, obviously those discussions would need to be had, but I certainly couldn't guarantee that the county council would be in a position to say you can't get on the road until after Christmas. Obviously, all roads are subject to the embargo. It's been like that for many years. It's considered that month is an appropriate period of time to allow trading around the Christmas period. So I suppose in summary, I can't give any guarantees that the Highway Authority and the people responsible for licensing roadworks would feel it acceptable to put the an embargo, if you like, just for CREST until the new year. As I say, anything else could happen, and I can just see a scenario where we have Thames Water or one of the other statutory undertakers come to us next week and say we need to do something, there's been an issue, and we would be letting them on anyway with the associated disruption that we've been talking about. So I suppose...
Okay, I think point's taken, Richard. Thank you. Now, we're speaking to the proposal by Councillor Follows and seconded by Councillor Hyman that we defer the consideration of this application. Does anybody wish to speak to the proposal? Councillor Goodridge.
I'm against a deferment. I think granting condition 11, whereby we agree to the 24-hour working, and asking the county authority, because I think we'd be in a stronger position with licences if we were said, look, we've agreed the 24 hours, therefore we're going to grant you a licence to do that for 4 to 6 weeks or less if coming to other bits. But if we defer it so that their application is totally in the air, I would have thought the Highway Authority are far less likely to not grant a licence. In other words, they're likely to grant a licence because that's what they can do now. But if we've given them the alternative with 24-hour, then I think it does strengthen the arm of the County Council. My view, I'd be welcome to the Highway Authority's thing. I accept also what Ruth says about the management plan says what the hours of working are. But to get round that, I asked the question, could we put an informative to say that if they should apply to extend the hours for this particular piece of work, as distinct from the rest of the site, to extend the hours subject to providing details of lighting and so on and so forth, the authority would be open to agreeing to amend the documents that have been agreed as an exception to allow longer working on the A31. Because that, I appreciate other documents are already in place which say when the hours of working are. But if we put it in as an informative that we would favourably consider it, is that a way around it?
Thank you. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I start off with the 24-hour night working suggestion? There are 2 blocks of sheltered housing immediately adjacent to
sorry to interrupt. At the moment, we're talking to the proposal to defer this application.
I've been waiting patiently, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I know, but if we decide not to defer it, then I will come straight back to you. But other people, you know, had indicated a wish to speak first. So we've gone through that. Councillor Follows has now made this proposal. Councillor Hyman has seconded it. So I have to address that proposal first of all. If you wish to speak to this proposal, please go ahead.
I think many of the matters of substance that have been mentioned here tonight that support deferral are totally wrong. It should be decided now.
Thank you. And Councillor Follows.
I'll just quickly speak to my reasons for deferral. I think actually they're not totally wrong because we haven't actually got the full information to assess what is the right thing to do here. If we were looking at a set of alternative highways plans as opposed to just picking the one that the developer gave to assess, I think we'd be in a stronger position. There are feasible alternatives. We've discussed a number of them here. Clearly, with some input from highways, there might be more feasible suggestions that allow us to do this quickly and also avoid some of the issues. So I think actually I'm suggesting we defer it so that we can have all of that information to properly assess it and also protect Farnham businesses over the Christmas period. I would also add to properly look at condition 6 that Councillor Mulliner has suggested too.
Councillor Story.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm also opposing the deferral. As the officers pointed out, there is already an extant permission for road closure which could be implemented tomorrow, limited hours admittedly, but we can't stop that. So deferring doesn't necessarily mean that the road won't be closed before Christmas. And the second thing is, if we defer, we're not changing the application to allow for maybe only having night working or having the evening rush hour being allowed to be closed and not the morning rush hour or any other suggestion that there might be. We're still coming back to the situation we have now, so I don't think we should defer.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm minded to support the deferment, only because I think with the fact that there's an extant position, a condition rather, on this, surely can I just clarify, would the embargo still apply to that extent? It would, thank you. Also, I remember back when we did the planning permission for this bridge, and I'm sure there was quite a bit of discussion about biodiversity and habitats and about light spill. And I think we made the bridge so it was had hard sides so that we were concerned about light spill coming from headlights and vehicles and things. I've got a big concern about working at night without the information of the impact on the habitat. So I wouldn't be able to make a decision on any kind of extended working hours without the information with regards to the impact of that lighting on the habitat there and along Borelli Walk, because I know that that was a big thing when we looked at the original application. So that's why I would support perhaps a deferment, because I don't have that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adams. I'll come to you in a minute.
I would be against the deferral. When I came this evening, I was thinking that actually that might be a good idea, but as I've heard what's going on this evening, and I think we've covered really all of the aspects that that would be debated as a deferral. It's all come out in the discussions tonight, so I would no longer support a deferral.
Thank you. Ruth, you wish to comment?
Yeah, actually, Councillor Townsend did make a very valid point that we would also, I mean, the situation in terms of the overnight working is quite complex on this site in terms of the impact on neighbours in terms of light spillage and noise, and also there would be, I think, a concern from the Environment Agency about any implications from light spillage from the floodlights on the biodiversity, given the site's proximity to the River Wey. So I understand that members might wish to defer the application, but there is no quick fix solution. It could take, for us to go through the process of ascertaining whether 24-hour working is going to be acceptable or not, will take quite some time. It will take updates to biodiversity reports, updates to noise reports, and updates to lighting reports. And in the meantime, we're missing out on this window of opportunity where the Woolmead development is the traffic levels for the construction of that are relatively low at the moment. And so we're missing out on an opportunity where we can get the bridge constructed prior to the traffic levels ramping up on the Woolmead development. And I just think that councillors should bear that in mind when they're considering deferring the application.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chairman. I too don't think a deferment's a very good idea. I think the issue here is, do we want to see problems before Christmas or not? I can understand the officer's comment about not overlapping with the Woolmead if you can help it. It seems to me that we've had a very clear hint from Richard that Surrey County Council cannot be relied upon to help in this matter, but we do have the other Richard Homewood in the building, in the room. I mean, can we as landlord insist on this if we want to? They can't start any of this until the 7th of... He may not be the right person to ask, but he is there, so I thought I'd try it.
Chairman, the answer is no, we can't. And as Ruth said, Crest, in terms of avoiding disruption before Christmas, as Ruth said and as Councillor Story said, Crest Nicholson have permission to set up tomorrow and work right the way up until, with a single lane closure, right the way up until the 7th of December, and then however many weeks after January that they want to. So we don't have any jurisdiction as a landowner. We don't own the highway, and we can't stop that happening. As landowner, and you know, the applicant hasn't applied to work overnight. They've applied to remove the condition, and that's the issue. But in terms of eliminating any lane closure between now and the 7th of December, we can't do that as a landlord, and there is permission for that to happen.
Thank you.
Could I come back, please, Chairman?
Yes, of course.
Because the alternative approach is that it seems to me that the 5 hours spent a day moving TM around is something that even Chris Nicholson will find rather tedious. Can we grant permission, but subject to a delay until 7th of January? So we take the risk they'll move their TM twice a day for the next 18 days, but in reality, the real work will start on the 7th of January, and we're happy for them to have a 24-hour closure.
I don't think. I mean, it's not. The implications of roadworks and their timing in terms of the fact that they would be running up to the Christmas period isn't a planning consideration. That would be dealt with by Surrey County Highways, and they have measures in place in order to do that. So it would not be reasonable for us to impose a condition of that nature on this application.
So I didn't, that wasn't the question I was asking. I said, are we actually able, and perhaps our legal friends can help us, to give permission, but starting from a certain date, if we wish to?
So if I understand
Chairman,
correctly, your
we're
suggestion is that we grant them the 24 hours, but starting on the 7th of January, yes?
Can I just comment? I think we come back to the same point, that the reason for that condition, I'm presuming, would be because it would be to do with the run-up to the Christmas period, and that isn't something that we can consider under planning legislation.
Well, sorry, why isn't that an example of residential amenity being severely harmed?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, the application is the very conditions. We just don't have the answer for members whether we can impose a condition where the application is to vary condition.
Mr. Chair, may I just actually add there that
I
that's
would
the reason I'm asking for
we
a
are
deferral.
still speaking to Councillor Follow's proposal. So, Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back?
I was just going to reiterate that it seems that we would require further information, whether it's about our rights to defer, to set a start date, or to find out the environmental impacts of lights and things, that we need more information in order to come to a decision to vary this condition.
Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A simple question which I'm getting a little bit confused. Ruth, for you, was if we delay this after Christmas, it will overlap Woolmead's rush as well, which will double the traffic?
Yeah, I think it certainly, yes, certainly in February, I think Richard said, is the time when the Woolmead development, the construction starts in earnest, and there'd be a lot of vehicles coming and going, whereas opposed to now when they're relatively few. So
if we delay before Christmas work, then we are definitely going to overlap that.
Yes.
And the rush will be horrendous, and the one closure will make it double the traffic after Christmas if we move that. No. Now, if the Woolmead, the traffic is coming as well, and the closure of single lane.
It's if the A31 work continues into February when the Woolmead traffic
that's
builds up.
what I mean.
Yeah, I think what you've got to balance up is whether you go for a 24-hour lane closure now, leading up to the 7th of December, and then being reinstated on the 7th of January, which would get the bridge constructed in advance of Woolmead ramping up in terms of the construction levels of construction trips that would be coming to and against their site, or the alternative option leaves you with the fact that then this would be ongoing whilst the Woolmead development is being undertaken.
A little bit more chaos, would it be?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I would leave Richard to comment on that. The only other thing, I do want to come back to this matter of putting on a condition about timing, because it's not for the planning authority to think about the timing of roadworks and their implications for businesses within a town. That just does not sit within planning legislation.
Ruth, I think that's a different matter to the proposal for the deferment that we're talking to here. Councillor Denis.
Thank you. Irrespective of what happens between the 7th of December and the 7th of January, the roadworks won't be there because of the embargo. So irrespective of what decision we take, that doesn't change. If they want, as has been said, tomorrow, they could start and go through the procedure every single day of moving all the cones in, and irrespective of our decision to defer, that will happen. If they have the 24 hours, effectively we're going to go from a projected 16-week period to a 4-week. That's a 75% reduction in time. Now, if we go for a deferment, they can still start that process. And we could end up with a 16-week process, which could be done over 4 weeks. And I think people, you know, Councillor McLeod was talking about the Christmas period, absolutely agree. But the embargo is in place, irrespective whether they got the current one, the 24-hour. That month there is, you know, it doesn't affect it. So, irrespective of what decision we make, the Christmas period, that 4-week period, doesn't change. And to me, I think going from a 16 weeks down to a 4 weeks, I think it's better than, you know, 16 weeks of pain.
Thank you. Councillor Gray and then Councillor Hyman, then we'll move to the recommendation.
Thank you. I'm against deferment. As far as I see it, we either accept this proposal. We've heard from Surrey County Council that they're going to monitor it, and I have every confidence that they will. And if they find there's a problem with it, then they will come in and do something. We lose on the 7th of November. It comes out anyway because that's the moratorium period. We have not 4 weeks, I think it's 12 days or something before Christmas from that particular point. Or we reject this proposal, and in rejecting it, then they go back to their off-peak lane closure during the day with all the impact, and we will still be relying on Surrey to monitor that and to do something about it if they don't. So I don't think deferring it actually changes my options. So for me, I either accept it and rely on Surrey, and I do accept the potential problems that it's going to cause for Farnham, but I would have to rely on Surrey County Council taking some pretty drastic actions if it became a problem. Or if we reject it outright, then basically we just live with the current thing. And if they want to, Crest can bring back another application in December, which we might think about differently for implementation in January. But accept or reject is my view, not defer.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. Of course, the problems that we've got now are because this wasn't done properly years ago, because proper assessments weren't done. We ought to do it right now so that we don't keep getting these problems with this development, so that we can get the thing built as soon as they've told us how, what the final plans are going to be, of course. Please do not underestimate what the effect this would have on the town over Christmas. If we allow Crest Nicholson to gridlock the town for 3 weeks, everybody will know to keep away from Farnham, don't go near to Farnham, go to Guildford, go do your Christmas shopping somewhere else, and then all of a sudden that gets taken away. People don't suddenly flood back to Farnham. It would wreck Christmas. 3 weeks of closing of 24-hour closures would completely wreck Christmas for our and possibly their businesses, for our retail economy in Farnham. They rely on good income at this time of year. So please, members, really think about this. If we were just to allow them to do this, it is going to wreck everything for those last 2 weeks as well. People aren't going to flood back all of a sudden for the last 10 days of Christmas shopping.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. I think you had a legal point you wish to make before I move to this recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, I think Lewis will take it for you.
That's okay. In response to Councillor Molyneux's question about our ability to attach conditions to the consent, I believe that you can under the relevant section of the Town and Country Planning Act. However, as Ruth said, I think we'd have to give careful consideration as to whether doing so would be reasonable and whether that condition would meet the legal tests, given the evidence we have before us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Councillor Follow's proposal and Councillor Hyman second that we defer this application. All those in favour of a deferment? Those against? And abstentions? Councillor Townsend, Councillor Henry. Right, so we move back to the main proposal. And Councillor Fraser, you've been very patient over the back there, and please feel free to speak now.
My thanks, Mr. Chairman. If you look at the plan, which in fact the part of the plan you need to be looking at is off the bottom of the location plan, 200 metres or so to the south, there is the Firgrove Bridge. The Firgrove Bridge effectively reduces the eastbound A31 bypass lane to one lane. It's no longer a carriageway of two lanes at that point, but one. So the problem has already been, major past problem has already been solved. If that lane restriction can be engineered to collaborate with that needed by Crest Nicholson on the other side of the lights, I'm sure the impact will be greatly reduced. It will still be there. More to the point, when it comes to restricting the traffic and causing gridlock, anybody suggests that there's a restriction on the traffic flow in South Street and Station Hill really is quite outrageous. If those roads are restricted, there will be gridlock in Farnham, far more effectively than restricting the lanes on the bypass. I've also heard tonight some ridiculous suggestions about working at night on the site. It's quite outrageous. There are 2 blocks of sheltered housing immediately adjacent to the western perimeter of the site, right close to the bridge. It will be unthinkable that we have the lights and the noise caused by night working. And you could say goodbye to the bats in the bat boxes or the bat poles. Can you please look at the data that's already in front of you, councillors and officers? You do not need a deferment to actually get that data. It's there already. You just need to do your homework.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Councillor Townsend.
I'm sorry, can I just find out from the legal team, were they saying that we could actually put a start date? Was that what they were actually saying? Which obviously affects things quite important.
Justification.
Lewis, would you like to reiterate what you said before?
Yes. I'm saying that the committee could choose to implement a condition which affected the start date. However, as I said, the committee needs to be satisfied that it meets the legal tests which apply to all conditions imposed. And specifically in this case, I would suggest that members would need to debate whether they do meet the tests and give cogent reasons as to why such a condition would meet those tests. Yes, it would require a planning purpose, and it would need to be considered against our planning policies in the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Members, time is getting on. I really don't want this to run past 10 o'clock, so we've got 20 minutes to consider this, hopefully. Councillor Storey.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to the air quality. We heard about the impact that there would be on the town centre. I wonder whether consideration has been given to the impact on the monitoring stations by the station and also in Recklesham Road, both of which would be subject to increased stationary and slow-moving traffic as a result of closing the lane. And secondly, just to ask Mr. Cooper whether on highway safety grounds he has considered the effects that already occur when there is a delay on the A31 which is that traffic moving to the east on the A31 gets fed up and crosses over the grass verge onto the westbound and then makes its way through Elstead or on other routes to get out of the area. And just, as I say, the safety of actually doing that.
I think I would say when we've got the situation where we've got traffic management, professional people on the ground who do this, day in, day out, and can react to delays on the arms that you're talking about. We're in a controlled environment. It's an existing situation when we obviously have delays in the peak hours at the moment. That's obviously made worse when we have roadworks at the moment. But we've got no evidence that there's a highway safety problem as a result of that. And that's, I don't think I could justify that in planning grounds. Clearly there's going to be people getting frustrated, but there's no evidence to show that that's causing a significant highway, a safety problem.
Thank you. Councillor Adams. Sorry, Councillor, would you just let Councillor Story come back on that and then
I'm sorry, I mean, I use that road all of the time, and on any occasion when there might be verge maintenance or whatever that creates any kind of restriction, people do, dozens of cars drive up onto the grass verge in between the two lanes and turn round and go back in the other direction. And they're not official crossing points, so there is a highway safety issue.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
I think what we're trying to consider here and what we're trying is to actually get this development done with the minimum of disruption to everybody concerned. And I think the answer to that must be to do it as quickly as possible. I don't see why we shouldn't consider the amenity of the shops and the amenity of other residents in Farnham. During the run-up to the Christmas period, I would have thought that was quite a valid planning consideration at this point. I do see if we are able to put in a change to the conditions that says it can't start till the 7th of January, that is a major problem, because surely most of the Woolmead traffic will be going out a different way and won't actually be using that particular access onto the site. So I would personally support a change to the condition that said that they can start on the 7th of January, and I would also support a change in the condition that said to allow a certain amount of night working. Again, it's a question of balance of annoyance, and is the balance of annoyance to get it all done more quickly, or to leave it for longer with more but slightly less disruption? So surely the best option would be to try and get this done as quickly as possible, starting on the 7th of January. And presumably if they can now do it with their standard working hours in 4 weeks, if we gave them another equivalent of 2 days a week, they could do it in 3 weeks.
Thank you. Councillor Nazir.
Very quickly, I'm sure if we put a condition on not to have the 24-hour working until the 7th of January, I suspect they could still do the current permission for between the rush hours up to the 7th of January. It seems to me the strongest, in December, the strongest seems to me, and I would ask Richard if he could confirm whether or not, is are we now, if we approve this, in a stronger position to grant a licence for 7th of January and not grant a licence in December, between now and December, because that seems to me our strongest point. The last point I want to make is the application we have to deal with is the one before us, and the one before us does not have extra hours, which is why I don't think we can put in a condition that you can do it for longer than they're asking. And the only way is an informative, and there are an awful lot of things that we're told have got to be sorted out before that could be granted anyway. So the most we could do is an informative. Do they want to apply for more? But I think we've got to look at it as per the application, and I think by granting it, hopefully we might be in a stronger position to persuade them to have all the pain in January onwards rather than a bit of pain in the next 3 weeks.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree. Councillor Adams, I agree with it. I think we should go for the condition. There are planning reasons, and I don't think in practice, given they'll be starting within about six weeks, no appeal would make any sense at all. But I agree that we can't change the hours today. So at an appropriate time, I will propose that condition is added, that we grant permission, but with a start date of 7th of January.
Okay, would you like to propose that now then, as time's getting on?
Yes, I would.
And do you have a seconder? Councillor Adams. Okay. Does anybody wish to speak to that proposal that we add another condition delaying the start of these roadworks till the 7th of January? Councillor Hyman.
Absolutely. That I mean, quite clearly there would be considerable environmental impacts to starting the works full time for the next 3 weeks, and then hoping people came back to Farnham again afterwards, which would be unlikely. But after January the 7th, it's very, very quiet because everybody's having to pay off their credit card bills after Christmas. January is a quiet month. Well, it's reality. It's what we're playing with. The difference is the environmental effects, of course, and we do have to consider the environmental impacts. It would be considerably great. This is a very wise condition. If we ignore all the elephants in the room that go along with this stuff. But as far as getting it done, if we ignore EIA, then yeah, that probably is the wisest way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Officers, do you wish to comment before we on this proposed condition, before we take a vote on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as Lewis has said, we can add a condition. It's just that we need to be clear that that's justified in planning terms.
You think it is, did you say? You think? Can we have a comment from the officers as to whether it is a planning reason to add that condition? Pardon? Constructive, thank you, Councillor Hunter.
Okay, so there may be some disagreement around this table, but I don't think there is a valid planning justification for adding the condition.
Okay, members, over to you then. The proposal, oh sorry, Councillor Follows.
Is impact on amenity and commercial amenity not a valid planning reason then? Because it sounds like it should be, as I believe Councillor Adams said and Councillor Mulliner said too.
No, we would not normally get involved in the timing of roadworks. That is something that is dealt with by the County Highway Authority, and they deal with that through the embargo that they have in place between the 7th of December and the 7th of January. So it's my view that it isn't a valid planning reason. Yeah. But if it's dealt with under other legislation.
But if in our view the embargo is insufficient and therefore we want to curtail the time that they're working to diminish the impact on amenity, we can class that as a planning reason in the context of this committee. Yes?
If that is what you wish to do, I have concerns about it, but if that's what you wish to do, you can make that decision.
Councillor Adams.
Well, I agree with Mr. Councillor Fellows, obviously, on that point. And that's the whole point. This is all about, actually, roadworks. So how can we say it's not relevant to the discussion we're having?
Okay, so proposed and seconded. Oh, Councillor Goodridge, did you wish to speak to this proposal? No. Proposed and seconded that we add in a condition delaying roadworks, or this 24-hour closure until the 7th of January. All those in favour, please. Against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Any abstentions? Okay, so that condition has been added. Are you happy for me now to move on to the recommendation then, or do you want to discuss it some more? Jolly good. Right, so which is the latest? This is the latest one, isn't it? Yes. Right, the latest, yes, so the recommendation is that, subject to conditions 1 to 14, with amended conditions 1, 6 and 14, and the additional condition regarding... The delay. Sorry, Councillor MacLeod, you wish to come back before we move to the recommendation?
I do briefly, Chairman, if I may. If I say, first of all, that, if I may, I happen to be the county councillor for the area, and I actually phoned the street works manager and the local highways manager, and the advice that Richard was given is exactly the same advice that they would actually give. But I'd say in addition to that they felt that they couldn't treat this applicant differently from any other applicant. They couldn't, on their behalf. I know you're proposing to put in your own condition, but they couldn't treat this applicant different from anybody else. So the standard embargo, in their view, had to apply. So I just provide that information. But the other information, the other comment I'd like to make actually, is they are also very frustrated with Chris Nicholson actually, and that this project was originally meant to be a 2.5-year project. It's now become a 4.5-year project. It started in February this year, and very little has actually been achieved. If Chris Nicholson had actually performed, this bridge would be built already. It should have been built over the summer holiday period, and we shouldn't actually be in this position. So it's time for Chris, and they wanted me to pass that point to this committee, it's time for Chris Nicholson to actually start performing. And I guess I should leave it at that. But I don't think we've got any choice on the main thing but to agree with it. But I'd point out that they can still close the bypass for the 8 hours a day anyway. So I'm not quite sure what you're achieving with your additional condition. Because if they do that, Christmas is disrupted already.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Councillor MacLeod. We've delayed it even further now. So the recommendation is that subject to conditions 1 to 14 with amended conditions 1, 6 and 14 and the additional condition that we've just discussed. Oh.
I'm sorry, given the hour, but I think condition 6 should be struck out and we should come back to it later.
Well, I think you need to propose that then, Councillor Mulliner.
I will happily do so. I think this should not refer to condition 6.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Townsend, right. Members, does anybody wish to speak to that proposal? Right, so the proposal is that we do... Oh, Councillor Hyman would like to speak.
No, it's not. I did mention actually a long time ago that there are... Condition 1's got plan numbers on there, and I just want to check those plan numbers that you're putting in are correct, because you're removing...
Hang on, we're talking to condition 6 at the moment as to whether we have a proposal that we delete condition 6.
Okay, well, condition 6, no, I don't need to talk to that particularly. I support
right,
what you're
so
saying.
members, all those in favour of removing condition 6 from this decision?
Yes.
Hang on, the officers want to speak to it first.
Sorry, in terms of condition 6, what was put in the agenda report does not reflect the condition that was on the bridge decision notice. So I think if you want to discount the amendments that I've suggested in relation to condition 6, you should go back to the wording on the decision notice for the dual lane bridge permission, which is the proposed access road, including its junction with the A31 Farnham bypass, shall be closed, and all curbing, verges, replacement trees, landscaping and highway margins shall be fully reinstated by the applicant in a manner to be agreed in writing by the local planning authority by the 30th of November 2022, or an alternative date to be agreed in writing by the local planning authority.
So are you saying there is a fixed date when they have to reinstate by?
Yes, the 30th, the condition on the decision notice, there's an error in the officer report, and the condition on the current decision notice is the 30th of November 2022.
So it's not linked to whether they've managed to get a particular building occupied?
No. Fine. Okay. Oh.
Right,
Chairman, do we want to propose
we need
that-
a revised proposal, seconder, and that we revise the wording of these conditions.
Can I suggest that we put in condition 6 as on the screen in place of condition 6 on our papers?
Thank you. All those in favour? Jolly good. So we are now back to, if I can find it, if I've got 2 minutes to, the latest. That's the one, yeah. So recommendation that subject to conditions 1 to 14 with amended conditions 1, 6 and 14, that is amended, and the additional condition regarding start date and informative one, permission be granted. All those in favour, please.
No, there's an extra condition.
No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18.
Those against?
1.
Abstentions? Right, so that recommendation is passed. We have nothing else to discuss this evening, so thank you for your time and a safe journey home.
The condition that restricts it to the 7th of January. Sorry? Oh.